Hello everyone. How are you doing today? Glad to be with you. Wow. It is May 9th, and I want to wish a happy Victory Day to those of us who celebrate the victory over fascism, the defeat of Nazi Germany, of the Italian fascists, the victory by the United States, by the Soviet Union, by Britain over the Axis. So much we can talk about here tonight. So much we can talk about. Wow. Folks, now is the time, if you haven't hit the like button, to hit the like button, to hit the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed. I notice some people say they're not getting the notifications, so now is the time to click that notifications bell. Make sure you get the notifications. I know a lot of you are here probably because you received them, so you want to make sure you keep getting those notifications. If you can tweet this out, bring people on board, make this a bigger conversation, post this on Reddit, post this on Facebook, tweet it out, make this a status, bring people on board, tell your friends to come join the fun. We always want this to be a bigger community. I'm glad you're all here. I really, really am honored and deeply appreciate having the ability to just chill with my community on Saturday night. We can't go out and dance. We can't go out and party. We can't go out to big political rallies where there's big crowds around us, but we have each other. We have our community here. And so, with everyone piling on in, now I'll just jump right into it. I will just jump right into it. If you give me a super chat, I will write it down and I'll address it after we do our roll call. But I'm just going to jump right into things. Just jump right into it. Folks, I would hate to be a conservative right now. I would hate to be a libertarian right now, because there's nothing more painful than having your beliefs just refuted by reality. Nothing more painful than that. Folks, I have heard all my life from these people who believe in the free market system that if you are poor, it's your fault. If you lose your job, it's your fault. If you can't have a good income, it is your own fault. All of the problems in your life are your own fault. Don't ask the state to step in, because in capitalism, you get ahead if you work hard. And if you don't get ahead, you have no one to blame but yourself. People that have suffered, people that are unemployed, people that maybe they have trouble paying their bills, well, they should blame themselves. We don't need food stamps. We don't need food stamps. I was at the grocery store and I saw this woman with kids who had food stamps. She was buying them unhealthy food. We don't need food stamps. These lazy people. Oh, we don't need financial aid. If you really want to go to school, you should save up the money to pay for it. We don't need government assistance for people to go to school. We don't need free college. We don't need free health care. Oh my goodness. Everyone wants a handout. It's all your fault. It's all your fault. That's what we've been taught. That has been the mantra of American conservatism. Now, that is different, and thank you, Tyler, for the super chat. That is different, of course, than classical conservatism. We know that conservatism is a broader political movement. It has different beliefs than that. But American conservatism has turned into just demagogic defense of the free market, libertarianism, right? And we're at the point where these beliefs are being widely refuted. There are 33 million people who have filed for unemployment in the United States since mid-March. 33 million people. The economy is doing miserably. And nobody in their right mind will say, well, it's because all these people made individual choices. They made individual choices. They deserve it. No, there's a pandemic. How bad do you expect COVID-19 to get in terms of consequences? All right. There's a pandemic that's on. People are losing their jobs. They're losing their homes. It's a nightmare. It is an absolute nightmare, right? We have a gig economy. So that number of 33 million people, that was only people who had regular jobs. But we know that 14% of the Uber employees have been laid off. A lot of independent contractors there. We had a gig economy. where people are struggling to get by, and so many people have lost their jobs, so many people have lost their incomes, they're worried, they're afraid, they're scared. And it's because of a society-wide problem. A society-wide problem. It's a society-wide problem. The pandemic was not caused by poor choices individuals made. It's a society-wide problem, and it requires a society-wide solution. But if you are a libertarian, if you are a conservative, and you believe that everything is just a matter of the individual, it's always a problem with the individual, it's never a problem with the system or society, it's always the individual's fault. Any problem anyone has is purely their own fault to blame. If that's the case, you have to be sitting there like a deer in the headlights. Did you receive my request to speak in Australia via Zoom? I did not. Send it to my email, first name, last name at Gmail. What is your opinion on market socialism? We'll talk about that. I have not received that invitation, so please send it to me, Helen. I will appreciate that. I'd love to speak. So, market socialism. Writing it down. So that's the situation we're in. I always break down American politics for people this way. And I say that we have the system of capitalism. And it's like a crazed wild beast, the most scary, crazed wild beast monster that you can have. It's got big teeth. It's monstrous. It's horrifying. It's dangerous. It harms people. And American politics is basically a debate about what do we do about this crazed wild beast, and how do we relate to this crazed wild beast called the rule of profits, capitalism. And we have the liberals that say, well, maybe we could restrain him a little bit. Maybe we can, put him on a leash. Maybe we can just kind of restrain this crazed wild beast, right? Then you've got conservatives that say he's not a crazed wild beast at all. He's an adorable, beautiful puppy. He's amazing. Oh, they're like that pet owner who's in denial about what their pet does. That hillbilly who owns a huge wild animal that attacks 4-year-olds or something, a huge dog. They're like, he wouldn't do anything. That's my adorable dog. They're like that. They look at the crazed wild beast of profits. They say that's an adorable puppy. It has no problem. No, you're wrong. It must be. You just must be wrong. It's an adorable puppy. That's the conservatives. The liberals say, well, we can just get him a nice leash. The libertarians say, well, the problem is the leashes. If he wasn't fenced in, if he was not fenced in, is ID poll ultra-leftism. If he was not fenced in, China imperialist, thanks, David. If he was not fenced in, he would have no problems. If only he were not fenced in. If we just lifted the fence, lifted the leash, this wild, crazy beast wouldn't be harmless. If we just lifted all restraints. That's libertarians. But it's those of us who believe in socialism that say, wait a second, do we really need to have this wild, dangerous, crazed predator on the loose? Do we really need to have it on the loose? Do we really need to deal with this wild, crazed beast? Maybe it's time we ought to put it to sleep. Maybe it's time to just kind of get rid of it so we can all sleep better at night. That's American politics for you. Those of us who are socialists say we shouldn't be facilitating this danger to society, this danger to humanity called profits and command, and called capitalism. And that's basically how you can understand the American political spectrum. Now, folks, these are hard times. A lot of people are very, very, very stressed out. If you look at these protests they've got, I'm sorry, folks. I mean, on the one hand, I agree with how they feel. I want my life back. I want to go to work. I want to sit in restaurants and order Diet Cokes and read books on my relaxing time. I want to be able to just liberal. I want to be able to just enjoy my life. I want to be able to have my normal life back. I know there's people who it's much more desperate than that. They need a job desperately. They need food desperately. And so we've got these anti-lockdown protesters. ejected. Alrighty. You know, we've got people that just, you know, they say that that they just want things to open up. There's this woman in Texas, I believe, who had a hair salon. I don't know if folks remember. She had a hair salon, and they gave her a court order to close it down. She violated it. She's going to jail for a week, and she's like a hero to these lockdown protesters. They've made her into kind of a hero because she has kept her hair salon open. She says she will keep her business open. She's not going to respect the lockdown regulations. And what's odd about all of this is, on the one level, I can understand how frustrated these people must feel. But at the same time, like, I thought it was leftists that were supposed to be snowflakes, right? Because if these people are out there, they can't give you a clear answer. Some of them think it's a hoax. Some of them think that the pandemic is a hoax. It's all the Illuminati. All these dead bodies are not real. They're all staged by the thing that's high up on the thing. We've seen anti-Semitic signs. We've seen, you know, all kinds of, you know, conspiracy. We got that milieu that thinks the pandemic is not real. And then you've got other people that say it's real, but they don't care, right? Oh, you know, just let them die, right? You know, Glenn Beck, the lieutenant governor of Texas, also says, just let them die. You know, let the old people die. We got to have old people die. And they're just desperate. They can't take it anymore. And I'm sorry, aren't we supposed to be the snowflakes? I mean, they're saying, I want to go outside. I just can't take it. They don't have a coherent message about why they want to go outside. I mean, it's just they're upset. They're upset, and they're screaming and yelling about it, and they can't even tell you what should happen. They can't even tell you what the solution is. They're just angry. They're just upset. You know, they're libertarian. They're free markets. They don't want the government to step in and bail out the people and have a response that makes sure everyone's taken care of, because that's the government. They know the government can't do anything because they learned about that in school, because communism is evil. So what in the world are they saying? What do they want? I mean, they're just out there screaming and yelling, and they're upset like all of us are, but they're not putting forward any solutions. They just want the lockdown to be lifted. And you look at it, and it's like everything that is said about socialists and communists, you look at these anti-lockdown folks that are being supported by Donald Trump, and you can see it 10 times over. What do they always say about communists, right? We don't care how many people have to die in order to achieve our goals, right? That's the allegation. We killed a gajillion million people in the Soviet Union and Cuba and China, and we don't care. We don't care how many people have to die. Well, they're openly saying that. We actually do have an answer to that. We may not agree with their analysis of the history of the 20th century, but they're sitting there saying that. Yeah, we don't care if older folks have to die. We don't care. Writing it down, essential workers. That's what they're saying. They're saying we don't care if people that have respiratory problems die. We don't care if people that are vulnerable die. We want to go outside. We want restrictions lifted. We don't care. They are openly saying what they accuse the left of covertly believing. They don't care how many people have to die as long as it keeps the stock market going, right? As long as the Dow Jones Industrial Average continues to rise, the stock market rises up, they're fine. They don't care. They do not care how many people have to die. And on top of that, right, they just want stuff, right? They can't coherently tell you. You go to them, you say, there's a pandemic, folks. There is a pandemic going on. We have to get it under control. What do you want to do about it? I don't know. I want what I want. It's like, I get that you want what you want, and I respect that you want what you want. I want what you want too, but how do we deal with this pandemic? Well, I just want what I want, right? Again, that's the stereotype of leftists. Leftists are accused, right? We just want free stuff. We don't care who's going to pay for it. This is every stereotype, every allegation, every caricaturization of socialists that you hear on Fox News is played out among these protesters. It's completely played out among them. It's shocking. It is shocking to watch. I would hate to be one of them right now. Because it's got to be a confusing world, because this kind of thing isn't supposed to happen. It's all supposed to be the fault of the individual. It's all supposed to be the individual's fault. No one is ever supposed to suffer because of the system. No one's ever supposed to suffer because of the crisis of capitalism. It's all supposed to be the fault of the individual. America's the greatest country in the world. Well, here you go. That's why I'm very lucky that I am an adherent of socialism, that I've studied Marxism, Leninism. I'm very lucky. You know, I don't know if any of you have ever been on the ocean, if you've ever been on a ship. But among sailors, it's widely understood that in order to not get seasick, you need to keep your eyes on the horizon. Because you're on a ship, and it's moving, it's shaking, it's moving. But there's one thing that constantly stays in the same place, and that is the horizon. So if you're looking to not get seasick, you got to keep your eyes on the horizon. It's the only way you can keep yourself together when you're out on the ocean. Keep your eyes on the horizon. Keep your eyes on the horizon. And socialism and Marxism and the ideology that we discuss every week, or a couple times a week now, that is our horizon. It is what we can keep our eyes on to understand the world around us and not go completely crazy amid a societal breakdown. We are witnessing a societal breakdown. We are witnessing the death agony of capitalism. We are witnessing the Gotterdammerung. We are witnessing the final conflict, right? We are witnessing a point in which human history and the human civilization can no longer tolerate the rule of profits. We're witnessing it. Before our very eyes, it's happening. We are watching capitalism in crisis. We are watching socialism continue to rise. And only this knowledge, only this understanding of what's going on, only the science of Marxism, Leninism is going to help us understand and get through this. Because if not, we're going to be seasick as hell watching the chaos unfold all around us. You know, it's sad. A lot of the politics that are coming out now that you see popular on the internet, it's almost not really politics. Politics is solutions, right? Politics is policy, right? All right. Propaganda. Okay. Oh, Michael says thank you. Well, thank you, Michael. Sorry, I'm writing down these super chats as they just keep rolling in, and I will get to them after we do our roll call, after I finish my opening here. But much of the politics that we see before us is not policy solutions. It's just a lot of mental illness, or edgelordism, I should say. I'll be more polite. I won't say mental illness. I'll say edgelordism. I'll say fronting. I'll say loose emotions expressing itself. One trend I've heard about is antinatalism, right? The belief that one should not have children, right? And when I heard about this, I assumed this was Malthusianism, right? It's the idea there's too many people in the world, where, you know, it's bad for the environment, people are reproducing too much. No. Malthusianism has been around a long time. But this antinatalism stuff is this angsty philosophy. Life is pain. And if you reproduce, you're creating a life that will suffer pain. Life is pain. And you listen to this and you're just like, oh my gosh, this sounds like, you know, I mean, but it's the same as this alt-right stuff. I mean, these people that walk around, Hitler wasn't so bad. Yeah, I like Hitler. I'm edgy. I'm racist. Yeah, I'm racist. I mean, they walk around. I mean, how do we know some races aren't superior to others? Yeah, I know it's edgy. I know I could get kicked out of school for saying it, but I ain't afraid to say it. I'm tough. Reminds me, I mean, this sad patheticness. This isn't politics. They're not putting forward a solution. These antinatal people. What, are they going to mass sterilize the whole population? No, they're just going, life is pain. I don't want to create life because it will create pain. Right? These Hitler people, I mean, do they have they're going to create a white ethno state, or, you know, they're just walking around, yeah, I'm racist. Yeah, I mean, it's pathetic. I mean, it really is. It reminds me a lot of what's passing for politics these days. Reminds me of when I was in a high school choir. Right? I was required to, you had to fill up your day with classes. We didn't have that many options at my Ohio public school. So I remember I took choir, and I was a bass, as you can tell. I was a bass, and I sat in the bass section, and there was this other guy who was also in the bass section, and he just, I mean, I wasn't particularly fond of choir. I didn't like it, but he was just sit there, and he was just, I'm too cool for this. I'm being in a choir is gay, and he would just sit there with this like angry look on his face for the entire year. And I would think, come on, it's like, we get it. You're too cool. You're too manly to be in the choir. But it's like, we're all here. We're all stuck in the choir. You like it or don't like it. Just kind of, cut the tantrum. And the tantrum wasn't even genuine. It was like he was trying to make sure we all knew he was too masculine to like the choir. And I just didn't like it. But again, not politics. Not politics. That's what a lot of this stuff. Oh boy. I mean, we're in a weird time, but the evidence that socialism is better than capitalism and will replace capitalism is all around us. It's all around us. Great example is Libya. When Libya was a socialist country under the leadership of Muammar Gaddafi, under Islamic socialism, it was the most prosperous country on the African continent. With state control of oil, they built the Great Man-Made River, the largest irrigation system in the world. They had the highest life expectancy on the African continent, according to the CIA World Factbook at the time. They had universal health care, universal education, and in fact, people from all over Africa were trying to get to Libya. They had a policy in Libya that if you were an African and you went to Libya, Gaddafi would give you a job. So all kinds of Africans were trying to pile in to Libya because it was so prosperous because of socialism. They were trying to get to participate in that African socialist economy. Gaddafi was the head of the African Union. He was pushing the idea of an independent African currency, and socialism was doing very, very well. Then we know what happened. Obama and the U.S. State Department and the NATO countries started sponsoring protests and revolution, and they destabilized that society, and then they said, oh, we got to rescue them. There was a NATO bombing campaign. And look at Libya today. Libya has joined the open international system, the free market capitalist system. It's a capitalist country. It's been regime changed, and it's miserable. It's absolutely miserable. The country doesn't even have a stable central government. Al-Qaeda and ISIS have set up shop. Parts of the country don't have electricity. It's a disaster. You look at what's been done to Libya, right? It's pretty obvious that socialism is better than capitalism. You look at the fact that Venezuela, the USA has been trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government for so long, right? They have dropped the oil price. They've cut off, the country. They've done everything they can to just make life worse for the Venezuelan people. And now the latest is that they sent down some military contracting companies, professional hired military contractors, Silver Corp. And these guys had a plan. They were going to seize Caracas within so many days, within so many hours. And these are professional, these are this is like they sent down guys that are supposed to be like, I don't know. They're supposed to be like the guy, the super soldier that Arnold Schwarzenegger plays in every like 80s movie. It's like these men, these professional soldier, hire, killer. It's like they sent these guys that are supposed to be like I don't know, I mean, go down the line. They're supposed to be G.I. Joe. They're supposed to be whatever. Okay. Well, you're very welcome. You're very, very welcome. I'll address that. Thank you for the super chat. But, they sent these guys that are supposed to be like the cream of the crop, super soldiers. And they were commandeered by Venezuelan fishing boats. The local Venezuelan fishermen, islands of Chao. They pulled up in their fishing boat and arrested them. They've got 2 American citizens there that were trying to violently overthrow the government. Yeah, it was pretty ridiculous. Pretty ridiculous. Pretty ridiculous. But that's the situation. You look at Yemen. Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the world. But at this point, LGBT. All right. you look at them, and I mean, they're the poorest country, one of the poorest countries in the entire world, underdeveloped, impoverished. They're just suffering, the Yemeni people. But since 2015, for 5 years, they have held out and resisted the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that has the fourth largest military budget in the world. All kinds of cruise missiles have been unloaded on them. They've been withstanding, this siege, this attack on them, and the Yemeni people continue to resist. And you've got Ansar Allah and the Houthis. You've got the Southern Movement that wants to restore the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen, the socialist country in the southern part of Yemen. You've got nationalists. You've got supporters of the former president. They're all lined up. The Yemeni people continue to fight back and continue to resist, right? And again, these are deeply poor people, but they're anti-capitalist, they're anti-imperialist, and they're standing strong. The evidence is all around us. If I could do something, I would have people come up every week and talk to us, and just kind of go over the evidence of Marxism's reality, of socialism's, necessity that they see in their lives every week. Think about it. People who'd get up and they could say, in my neighborhood, I saw so many people that were unemployed but had something to contribute to society, needed work, and I saw all this work that needed to be done, but the capitalists couldn't make a profit from it. I saw crumbling roads, crumbling schools. Why? Only because of capitalism do we not hire the unemployed to do the work that needs to be done, right? People could talk about farmers pouring out milk and pouring out food at a time when, grocery stores are empty, but yet we're throwing out food because the way things are organized. We don't have a central plan. It's all organized by the market. Profits are supposed to have the answer, but profits ain't working out too well. We can go down the line. There's many, many, many examples of capitalism, capitalism being outmoded, of the computer revolution eliminating labor, of the computer revolution, artificial intelligence necessitating that we have a rational, centrally planned economy. You can look for many, many examples of this, and I wish every week I could just take calls. I wish I could set it up so I could take calls and people could just call in and describe what they've seen this week, what they've seen at their job, what they've seen in their community that shows the necessity of socialism, because the evidence is all around us. You can't count on our media to do it for us. They're not going to say it. They're not going to advertise it. But the evidence should be all around us. And it is all around us. You can see it with your own eyes, how China is speeding ahead because of their planned economy, while our free market system is crashing and moaning. While we've got these people out in the streets demanding we open up immediately so they don't go out of business. We've got plans by Cuomo. He's going to hand New York City over to billionaires. It looks like they're going to have billionaires try to revamp New York City in the aftermath of the pandemic. This is the reality. Folks, if I was not gainfully employed, if I was just doing these lives, I tell you what I would do. Is I would take a walk. You couldn't do it now, but when this pandemic was lifted, if I was not gainfully employed, if I had more free time, if I was just doing these kind of lives and videos, I would walk from one end of this country. I would walk to one end of this country, and do join the Discord. Great stuff is going on in the Discord chat. I would walk from one end of this country to the other. Right? Walk. And I would travel through this country having little meetings and public events about socialism. In every little area, I would just go from one end of this country. I'd go from New England, New York, where I'm at, all the way to Southern California, stopping along the way in every little city and every little town, and pointing out why we need socialism. I think about Eugene Debs and that little red train car that he had that would just go from town to town preaching socialism. I think about William Z. Foster and his presidential campaigns. Well, thank you, Max. I appreciate it. I think about his campaigns for president, where he went to every corner of this country showing the need for a socialist economy. And yeah, there you go. And it's absolutely necessary. It's absolutely necessary that we get beyond this. I did hear a wild story one time. And the wild story was, it was, New York City. See, part of me, I miss sitting in restaurants, right? And so I'm thinking about sitting in restaurants. I'm remembering things that happened. And one thing that happened to me is I was sitting in a restaurant having dinner with a friend of mine. And this old man, and this happens a lot. In New York City diners, you see a lot of old men. They're just kind of hanging out. They have an apartment near there or whatever, and they're just kind of hanging out in the diner. And this old man saw that we were communists, and he kind of came over, and he said, like in the whispered voice, he said, "My father was a Trotskyist." And my friend and I looked at each other like, okay. He's like, "My father was a Trotskyist." And we're just like, okay. And this old man proceeded to tell us this story that amuses me. So, this old man was telling that his father had been a Trotskyist when he was young, right? And so this is like, this man was old, so it's like his father, we're talking 1920s, 30s, he said. Now, his father had become a conservative and had become right-wing in his later years. But it was whispered around the house, when your dad was young, he used to be a Trotskyist. And so one day, this guy says that he'd come home, and he'd been someplace, and he'd bought a copy of the Daily Worker, or the People's World, or whatever the Communist Party newspaper was. And he knew that his father was a conservative, had been a Trotskyist in his younger days, was a conservative, so he was quite nervous. And his father walked in, and he saw that communist newspaper, and he said, "What is that? Is that the communist newspaper?" And the young man got a little nervous because he knew his father was very right-wing, very conservative. And his father's face just lit up. Just lit up. "I used to sell the communist newspaper," he said. And his father had it was like seeing that newspaper, even though the guy he was already a Trotskyist, he was anti-socialist, anti the Soviet Union, even though he'd become a conservative, just seeing that newspaper made him light up because it reminded him of his younger days. It reminded him of when he believed in something. It reminded him of when he had hope in his life, when he was part of a project to remake the world. And he expected his father to be angry that he had this communist newspaper, but his father was actually delighted to see it because it reminded him of better times. You talk to people who've stopped being communists, right? You talk to people who've lapsed, right? And I met a lot of people who they were active in their younger days. They just kind of moved on with their lives. And they would see me, and see me selling newspapers and see me talking about communism, and it would give them this glow, this joy, because they remembered what it was like to actually have meaning in your life. I had a lot of college professors who'd been activists in their younger days, and they couldn't be activists now, and they didn't understand it, right? They didn't understand. They didn't know people were still activists. They didn't know people were still promoting socialism and communism. And they would see me and my newspapers and my pamphlets and all of that, and they would just light up because it reminded them what life was like when it had meaning, when it wasn't just, paying the bills and taking the kids to soccer practice, when they had something to live for, when they had a horizon to keep their eyes on. So many people long for a horizon. And I think we Marxists, we have the horizon. And China is rising because as a country, right, socialism with Chinese characteristics, they have a horizon. They know their purpose. When every Chinese child goes to school, they're given a red scarf to symbolize their membership in the Young Pioneers. And they wear this red scarf around their neck. And they're told that red scarf is their own little piece of the Chinese flag, right? And that they are part of a project to build a whole new country and to move China toward that ultimate goal of communism, right? They're part of a project. But we here in the United States, no. Do we tell our children they're part of a project? No. Right? We might have them say the Pledge of Allegiance, tell them they're free, but they're not part of a project. No. They're not on a mission. No. We're free, right? And do we tell people an ideology? No. People think for themselves, right? That's America. It's all about think for yourself. And what's required reading in school? George Orwell, right? Animal Farm, 1984, totalitarianism, right? We don't believe in any of that totalitarianism. We have people think for themselves. Think for yourselves. I mean, I don't know how many of you have ever experienced that. You'll be out handing out leaflets someplace, and you'll go to hand someone a leaflet about something they've never heard of before, one of the ideas that's marginalized in the society, like socialism or Marxism. I can't read that. I think for myself. I don't want to be contaminated. I think for myself. When I get home, I'm going to watch CNN. I'm going to watch Fox News, and then I'll turn it off and make up my own mind. I think for myself. So I can't read your leaflet. Oh, no, no, no. I think for myself, right? So many Americans can't find their own country on a map. You give them a world map. You say, where's the United States? They don't know. But they're free. But they're free. They think for themselves. Think for yourself has become a euphemism for not thinking at all. That's the reality. And as much as the Western world likes to say it's free of ideology, it believes in individualism, it believes in all these things, the reality is profits are in command, greed runs things, and they will do everything they can to suppress those who point to the way out of this nonsense, the way out of this insanity, which is the banks, factories, and industries being organized to serve the people, a rationally planned economy, the hope of socialism. So there you go. And on that note, folks, if you haven't already hit the like button, now is the time to do it. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, now is the time to do it. If you have not shared this to make this a bigger conversation, to bring your friends along, now is the time to do it. And I'm going to reach over, not for diet beverage. We're not at that point yet. We're near opening up, but we're not at diet beverage point yet. But I do have some lovely orange juice. I'm going to take another sip of my lovely orange juice, and you can start giving me your names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Let's see who's with us tonight. FVK from Memphis. Sami from the United Kingdom. Mitch from Australia. Ken from Connecticut. Chan from Georgia. Bolshevik from Austria, Ali from Toronto, Rachel Martinez, why is there a fascist here? Lawrence Chu from Albany, Sam's, hey Caleb in Los Angeles, UK, Voltaire, New Jersey, Real Hampshire, UK, me also man, California, Bauxite from the Philippines, Brian Schaefer in Illinois, Pennsylvania, Will DeMarco, New Orleans, Huey Long, John Burke from Switzerland, Max from Boston, Robert from Texas, Ellie from the United Kingdom, Ron from Utah, KJ Mack from Texas, Will from Fresno, California, JB from Costa Mesa, Punicki from Finland, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Wilmington, California, Obero, Long Island, New York, Will Lotz, Hi from Austin, Texas, says George Kraft, Glasgow, Scotland, Montreal, Rachel Martinez in Independence, Missouri. Bing, sovereign state of Taiwan. Part of China, you mean. From the future. Frank from the Netherlands. Kevin Q from Ohio. Hello from Norway. Greece. Canada. Wow, this is going fast, says David Fox. KJ Max says LOL. Keep sending your name, by the way. Dylan from Worcester, Massachusetts. Helen from Melbourne. Toronto. Nigeria. West Virginia, OP from Florida, Javier from Argentina, Harry from Spain, Will DeMarco, East Germany, Itatis, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn. Who else is with us tonight? ILW Local 13 is with us. Great union. All right. New Jersey, Sydney, Australia, Los Angeles, Tamara. Long Island City, LA County. David from Italy. All right, keep sending. If I missed you, if it didn't, not everything goes through in my feed. So if I missed you, do it again so I can read your name. I want everyone to be called out. Bendigo, Australia, David Fox. Hi from the Philippines. Onita, New York, says Tyler Whittaker. Bendigo, Australia. Charlotte, North Carolina, Connor from Indiana, Mike Barson from the United Kingdom, Nate from Sydney, Australia, NYC, Michael Epstein, Adi from Bed-Stuy, Thaddeus from Memphis, Tommy Farras from The World, hi from Mississippi, says JT24, Bristol, Wisconsin, says Robert Coates, hi from the Philippines, Merrill from California, George from Minnesota, right? Cascadia, Pacific Northwest, Channel Islands, Great Britain, Alex Galizia in Nevada, Tuvalu, Blevel from Canada, Joanne from Amsterdam, Netherlands, Michael Epstein in New York once again, Donnie Wallace says hello, Hello to you, Donnie. Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon, JS. Right? Newton Grove, North Carolina. Watching from Tampa, Florida, says Herb Bryant. Right? Channel Islands, Great Britain, Von Habsburg. Another Mike in Phoenix, says Nick Name. And I believe we have come to the point in which I can... Oh, Shaniqua from Buffalo is with us. Sure. George is with us. Ontario, California. Right? Good work from London, says Julian Morgan. Well, good work to you. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Adi Dali from Seattle. Indeed, indeed. Glad you're with us. Robert from Hawaii is with us. Folks, looks like I have some super chats to jump into. So, what are the long-term impacts of COVID-19? Well, we know it's going to solidify the rule and the dominance of some corporations in the United States. We're going to see a higher rate of monopolistic stagnation. Amazon will be riding high. Zoom will be riding high. Silicon Valley will be riding high. Bill Gates. I suspect there's going to be more control over the economy. There's going to be more regulation of capitalism, and that the Silicon Valley faction, Big Oil and Silicon Valley, will come out of this stronger than ever. The fracking companies may be done in. Yeah, I mean, I expect there will be more technocratic measures that will be taken as a result of this. However, I also think that it'll probably result in further centralization of the population in the United States on the coastal areas. I think it's going to economically gut and continue the process of economically looting and gutting the Midwestern states, the South. So there you go. I think it's going to result in that. I think we may get a bigger police state out of this as well. I mean, we're already seeing the reports of what the NYPD has been doing here in this city, how they've been enforcing the social distancing regulations, and kind of viciously going after, the African American community. I think we're going to see more of a police state. I'm not sure how it'll play out in terms of the elections, but I think this is going to further, along the process of Russia and China rising and the Western capitalist countries getting weaker. We're already seeing it. Now, I worry, it seems like it seemed to be a divide. For a while, it seemed like the Democrats were focused on hating Russia. Republicans were focused on hating China. Now there's been a pivot where it seems like the hatred of China is kind of focused now. Now China has maneuvered. They got this before anybody else. They dealt with it very effectively. What would you like to have another chat about? Sure. Yeah. Workers' Party. Yeah. I love everything I see about the Workers' Party is very exciting. I would love to have Jyoti on again, or another person from the Workers' Party. I'm really excited about the Workers' Party, George Galloway. So yeah, I think China will continue to rise. I think the West will continue to be confused, and we'll be dealing with that. The next super chat I was asked was, what is your opinion of market socialism? Well, I think it's necessary. I think you need a market sector in a socialist society. I've said that before. Major industries should be run by the government. Banking should be run by the government. Electricity should be run by the government. Natural resources should be run by the state. You need a planned economy. But within that planned economy, there's plenty of room for tech startup companies, privately owned hotels, privately owned restaurants, consumer goods, children's toys, right? Computer games. I mean, things like that shouldn't be made by government employees, right? You need innovation. You need market solutions in some of those areas. The thing is, you need the economy overall to be planned and rationally controlled. I don't know who that is, Addie. I don't know who this LaGuardia person is, so I can't give you an answer. I'm sorry. I gave you about market socialism. Is IDPOL ultra-leftism? Not exactly. Ultraleftism is a deviation of socialism. Ultraleftism is when people say things like, well, we should, we don't want to run in elections because only communist revolution is the answer. Well, yes, but running in the elections is a way to, put forward that message. It's a way to carry out, a progressive agenda, etc. So ultraleftism is when people say, well, we don't want a minimum wage because we want people to be more poor so there could be a revolt. Well, that's wrong because when people are suffering, that's just demoralizing, right? It's you need movements, you need organizations. Revolutions don't just happen out of the air; they happen when people are organized and in motion. So if things just get worse, the result is people being demoralized and feeling victimized. If there's no movement, if there's no resistance to things, so that's ultra leftism is kind of when people have it in their minds that they can skip ahead, right? There's some kind of get rich quick scheme to revolution. It's this deviation where they're doing things that are not going to strengthen the revolutionary movement in the long term, but they have it in their mind that proves how pure they are, right? They're so revolutionary. I'm so revolutionary, we don't run in elections because we know that only revolution is the answer. I'm so revolutionary, it's like they're doing things that don't actually advance the revolutionary movement. They make the person doing them feel good about themselves. Identity politics is another phenomenon. I would say identity politics, it's not a deviation of Marxism. It's separate from Marxism entirely. That's oppression theory, right? Postmodernism. That's the thing, right? It's been broken down this way before, but Marxism is not postmodernism. Postmodernism is not Marxism. Marxism is an understanding of how human history works, dialectical materialism, historical materialism. Humanity is advancing, historical progress. Postmodernism says there is no narrative. There is no grand narrative about how humanity works, that everything's a matter of opinion. There are competing narratives. And identity politics is about selecting narratives and highlighting them. It's this feeling that, okay, the problem isn't capitalism. It's that the narrative of LGBT or the narrative of African Americans, the narrative of women hasn't been highlighted. We need to highlight the narrative of different voices, and we need to deconstruct the oppressive relations, the oppressive. It's about change. It's about sitting around and having group therapy. Really, that's what they want to do. Is they want people to sit around and have group therapy. They want people to listen to each other. They want to hear the competing narratives. That's what oppression theory wants. They don't view things in terms of class struggle. They especially don't view things in terms of economics. ID poll, whatever you want to call it, ID poll, postmodernism, oppression theory. There's different names for it. It's the stuff that's being peddled on the campuses right now. It's the stuff the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller think tanks pay college professors with socialistic and left-wing views to talk about. That worldview, that pedagogy, I guess you could call it, right? That way of doing things where it's about privilege. It's about white people learning that they have white privilege. It's about people of color feeling empowered. It's about LGBT. It's about breaking down the concept of gender. It's like that narrative, right? And I'm not saying that that's not important. I think that, it's true that, people need to acknowledge how other people suffer. People need to listen to other people's voices. I'm not saying that there's nothing true there. But that in and of itself is not Marxism. That's not Marxism. And in fact, it's a more efficient way to run imperialism. The idea is you can have a more effective imperialism if you're more sensitive to people. It's a way to manage imperialism more effectively. And that's all there is to that. It's not ultra-leftism, because ultra-leftism is a deviation of Marxism. Social democracy and reformism is the right deviation of Marxism. Ultra-leftism, anarchism, is the left deviation of Marxism. Marxism is Marxism, but ID poll is a completely different thing. It's a completely different thing, and most of the voices advocating ID poll don't really want to overthrow capitalism. They view the problem as privilege, as patriarchal structures or something like that. They don't really want to overturn capitalism at all. They may draw from Marx here or there. They may pull things from Marxism, but ultimately, if you read bell hooks, if you read Judith Butler, that stuff is not Marxist. That's something different. I'm just being brutally honest. I remember when I was in college, I went to the university library, and I remember I asked the librarian, I said, "Do you have anything by Earl Browder?" And he said to me, Earl Browder, the leader of the Communist Party from the 1930s? I said, yes. And he said, I think we do have something by him. He said, why would you want something by Earl Browder? I said, well, I'm a Marxist. I'm studying the history of the Communist Party. And he said, well, yeah. He said, I can understand you being a Marxist, but people your age that are Marxists, they study bell hooks. They study Judith Butler. They don't study Earl Browder. Well, I was interested in studying Earl Browder. I was interested in studying William Z. Foster. Earl Browder became a sellout. That's a whole story. I've talked about it before. But it's like I'm interested in Marxism. I'm not interested in postmodernism. And that postmodernism is well-funded and it's promoted on the campuses. And for a lot of people who grew up in conservative homes, it's the first thing they've encountered that goes against the conservatism they grew up. And they feel very empowered by it. They think, wow, they grew up in a household where there was nothing wrong with capitalism. There's no such thing as racism. It's just, and they grow up in this household where they're hearing nothing but conservatism. They go to a university and they have a postmodern professor and they go, wow, this is amazing. This is brilliant stuff. Well, it's better maybe than what you grew up with, but it's not the answer. It's not Marxism. So I guess I don't consider IDPOL to be ultra-leftism because ultra-leftism is within the spectrum. Someone's saying that back in their day it was Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse. And yeah, Herbert Marcuse. We now know about the Frankfurt School, how all that was subsidized by the CIA, Adorno, Congress for Cultural Freedom, Der Monat. We know that was, and Marcuse himself was a State Department employee at one point. But yeah, we know that like neo-Marxism was being pushed by the CIA as a counter to actual Marxism. And we know that just the same way as what's going on now, right? That they have their selected voices of leftism. And, they talk the way they talk. And this isn't the real deal. This isn't the real McCoy. This is synthetic left. And that's why I'm writing this whole book, The Synthetic Left, to talk about this. Wow, I don't want you to all fall over. All right. Okay. What do you say to people that say China is imperialist? Well, I've answered this before. I will answer it again. Imperialism is not a synonym for influence. It's not a synonym for doing business with another country. It's not a synonym for having influence in another country. Imperialism refers to a specific economic relationship where a country is kept poor, where it is deindustrialized, where its ability to develop an independent economy is taken away, and it's reduced to being a client state, right? The Soviet, the United States would go into a country. It puts all the local businesses out of business, right? That's what happened in Mexico, for example. They used to make their own food. Now, all the local farms have gone out of business and they have to import their food from the United States. That's imperialism. Imperialism is, countries being unable to develop their, okay. Understand. It's countries being able to develop their own industries and not being able to develop their own industries, not being able to raise up out of poverty, but just kind of being dependent client states of Western capitalism. That's imperialism. And when China goes into a country and trades, it does the exact opposite. It tends to stimulate. It builds infrastructure that stimulates the domestic economy. It makes it easier for local businesses to open up. It makes it easier for companies to go in there and trade. China's relationship economically with the Belt and Road Initiative is the opposite. It tends to go into countries, and those countries get wealthier, and China gets wealthier, and they both get wealthier in the process. That's not imperialism. Imperialism is about holding back economic development, forcing the country to be a captive market, preventing them from growing their own products. When the British went to India, for example, they burned down all the textile mills and forced the people of India to import their cloth from Britain, right? Another example, what did Gandhi do in India? Gandhi was very famous for boiling seawater to make his own salt. Why? Because they had a law that you had to import all your salt from the British, right? Because they were using India as a captive market. China does not do that. They go into countries, they build infrastructure, they provide loans to local businesses, and they do everything they can to stimulate because they know the wealthier that country becomes, the wealthier China is going to become. It's win-win cooperation. And they have this understanding that if countries, around the world can become closely tied into each other, they'll be less likely to go to war. And on top of that, the economy will be more stable because they'll be more tied in. And their vision of globalization is contrary. It's not free market globalization. It's the opposite. It's rationally planned economies, trading with each other, connecting to each other, being connected by the Silk Road, by, major highways and trains. They're really into trains. They're really into trains connecting countries. They're really into infrastructure. I mean, what China's doing, building this infrastructure around the world, loaning money to developing countries, it's a completely different method. It's not imperialist. People want to say it's imperialist because, and it's annoying to me because the people that say China's imperialist are the people it's so painful for them to ever admit the USA has ever done anything imperialist, right? And it's shocking to me. But you'll meet these people and they'll sit there and they it's like for them to admit that the USA has done imperialist, it's like pulling teeth out of them. It's like, oh, well, yeah, but Gaddafi was bad. But yeah, but, Maduro's bad. And okay, well, maybe the USA made mistakes, or maybe 100 years ago we were imperial. It's like we can't, the USA is not imperial. I mean, it pains them to admit that USA is imperialist. But then China loans money to countries, clearly imperialism. I mean, these allegations they make against China, they make them baselessly. They don't even have the facts to add it up. Oh, they're trapping them with debt. How are they doing that? Can you get specific? Well, we know. I mean, they're loaning money to these countries, so then they'll be trapped with debt. This is just a plot. I mean, it's just the double standard is ridiculous, right? Now, are there examples? I'm sure there are many examples of Chinese businessmen doing business in some country and being disrespectful to local population. Sure, and that's not right. Shouldn't happen. There are examples of Chinese companies that don't treat people right, and that's wrong, and it needs to be stopped. I'm not going to say that nothing bad goes on, but the relationship. China is not enriching itself at the expense of these countries. In fact, it's the opposite. China is loaning monies to countries in the hopes that they will become wealthy. China seeks to gain as these countries gain. China is not gaining at these countries' expense. That's just the economic reality of it. And again, it's so easy. Again, it's a confirmation bias. You read these articles. Well, China built a stadium in this country. Yeah, what an evil plot. I knew it. Meanwhile, Mexico has been devastated by U.S. trade. Haiti has been just destroyed by free market policies. Haiti has been devastated. Well, yeah, but that's really because of the Clinton Foundation. Oh, well, that's just because it's a corrupt country. The people there are poor. You look at Haiti and its relationship with the United States. The United States has gutted and looted and kept Haiti from developing. But no one can ever say that's imperialist. But China builds a train through Afghanistan. Oh, imperialism. It's the double standard. It makes my head want to explode. Someone says, when you call someone a liberal, what does it mean? Good question. Very good question, right? The word liberal, the way we use it in the United States, I heard this growing up. It was constantly. When I was growing up, when I was a kid, the word liberal was like a curse word. You're welcome, David. The word liberal was like a curse word, right? I remember, I was someplace and I said, maybe, healthcare should be provided. And someone said, that's liberal crap. If something was liberal, it meant it was bad. Rush Limbaugh was very popular in my area, and he'd be on the radio and he'd say, liberals. It's the liberals. They don't like America. They're a bunch of liberals. They're bad people, those liberals. They're liberals. I don't like liberals. I'm Rush Limbaugh. Liberals. It's the liberals. Stop being a liberal. Liberals are bad. Liberals don't like America. Liberals. It was like, if you were a good person, you were an evangelical Christian, you were a conservative, and you supported the Republican Party, and there were these people who didn't do that, and they were called liberals. And that was kind of how it was talked about. There was the way you're supposed to be, and then there's liberals. And, obviously, things are a little more complicated than that. Remember when I was in college, I went to a college, and I remember, it was, compared to most colleges, it was pretty conservative, very big business school and all of that. But, in our sociology classes, they would talk about the problems of capitalism. They would talk about racial inequality and stuff. And so there were many, many students who would just say, this school is so liberal. It's so liberal. What does that mean? Well, they talk about things that you're not supposed to talk about. So it's liberal. It's liberal. It's just so liberal. And people would say, well, this school is very, very liberal. And it was like, it was weird. And it was just kind of, for people who grew up in conservative homes and all of that, if you acknowledged any of the problems of capitalism, you were being a liberal. But what does liberalism actually mean, right? And in American political discourse, it's like Democrats are liberals, Republicans are conservatives. That's what it means. But oddly, the term liberalism goes back to the Enlightenment. It goes back to the time of the American Revolution, the French Revolution. There's some people driving motorcycles outside. Unbelievable, but some loud motorcycles. There's, liberalism. This is a philosophy that comes out of the Enlightenment, and it's the notion of individual rights. That's really what it is. It's the notion of rights for the individual, the declaration of the rights of man. That's liberalism, right? Human rights. These are liberal concepts. It's the idea, it's individualism. Individualism. That's what liberalism is, right? It's the idea of individuals protecting the rights of individuals, right? And then economic liberalism is the idea that the government should not play a role in the economy. Let the economy laissez-faire. That's economic liberalism. Social liberalism is the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, right? And we talk about the right to privacy in the U.S. Constitution, meaning that, you have the right to do what you want to do, right? The Supreme Court of the United States legalized abortion. And they said it's a woman's right to privacy, a privacy right. And that's not that a woman has the right to not have people think she's pregnant. It's the idea that if you're not bothering anyone else, you can do what you want. It's your body, right? And unless you can prove that what you're doing harms someone else, unless you can prove that fetus is a human being that has the rights of other human beings, if you can't prove that, right, it's your privacy right, right? That you can get a tattoo, right? Because that's your privacy. It's your body. You can make the decision to do what you want to do with your body. And if you were an adult and you want to go get a tattoo or a piercing, you can do that because it's your privacy right, right? That's liberalism. Liberalism is the philosophy of individual rights. That's liberalism. There's economic liberalism. There's social liberalism. That's what liberalism actually means. And, there's a lot of these like libertarian types that go around saying, I'm a classical liberal, because they know they finally found out what the word means. But it's the notion of individual rights, right? It's individualism, right? And that's liberalism. That's what it means. In Marxist circles, if someone's being liberal, it means that they are thinking more in terms of the philosophy governing the Western world than in terms of Marxism. They're being liberal. Right? And other examples of liberalism can be when people argue that there's two sides to every story, right? There's no real truth. Well, I can see both sides. They don't want to solidly take a position. People can see that as liberal, right? Neoliberalism. I see Kinky mentioning neoliberalism. Well, neoliberalism is starting in the 70s, but really before that, you had the Maupin Society, but aggressively in the 1970s, you had a push for government deregulation, for privatizations, to roll back the Keynesian consensus. It was an economic school of thought. Neoliberalism, Milton Friedman, Alan Greenspan, people like that, they were pushing deregulation of markets, and it was neoliberalism, a new wave of economic liberalism. You had classical liberalism, which was before neoclassical economics. Then you add Keynesianism, the Keynesian consensus that came after World War II. After the Great Depression, after World War II, you had the Keynesian consensus, right? People understood that John Maynard Keynes, the economist in Britain, had said the government has to spend money to prevent economic crises, and there was the Keynesian consensus. The whole world kind of agreed, yeah, we need the government to spend money. We need to stimulate the economy. We can't just have free markets, right? We need government involvement in the economy. And then after 2 decades of the Keynesian consensus, you had the rise of neoliberalism, of people saying, well, actually, no, we can have government-run things. And neoliberalism was not full-on classical liberalism. It was a little bit different in the sense that it said, for example, neoliberalism said, for example, like, well, we can have school vouchers. Classical liberals would say, unless you can pay for the school, education is not guaranteed to you. Well, neoliberalism is kind of compromising. It's saying, okay, the government will pay for school, but we'll give you a private school voucher. The government will pay for you to go to a private school, right? the government, we can have private prisons. It's tampering with the apparatus of the United States to move it in a more free market direction. Private prisons, military contractors, charter schools, schools for profit. Always assuming that that the market solution will make it better. That's neoliberalism, and it refers to economic liberalism. It has nothing to do with liberals and conservatives. And I've heard people use the word. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people use the word neoliberal as a synonym for moderate Democrat. How do you explain people that Marxism debunks these various conspiracies going around, such as plandemic? All right, plandemic conspiracy theories. All right, writing it down. You will get an answer. All right. Now someone's saying, how can China be a socialist country if it has commodity production? Well, it's very interesting. In his final years, the last book that Stalin ever wrote was called The Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR. And one of the things he raised in there is that the USSR, even though they had 90% state ownership, the USSR had commodity production, right? Commodity production is the factory makes the product, people go and buy it, right? They pay money for that product, they get paid a wage to produce the commodity, then people go and buy it. That's commodity production, right? And so people say, well, that's not, Marx wanted to get rid of commodity production, right? It shouldn't be that the people are paid to come assemble commodities. Those commodities are then sold for a they're sold and then people spend their money to buy them. That's what Marx was trying to get rid of. Well, communism, the ultimate stage, the ultimate vision of a stateless, classless world, yes, is a world in which people do what they feel like doing. They're not, going to work and getting paid a wage to do that work and then going and with that money buying commodities. They're not being paid to produce commodities and then spending their money to buy commodities, right? Communism, the ultimate vision of a world of vast material abundance, is supposed to be a society where people do what they feel like doing with so much technology and, like a 1 hour work week or whatever. They do what they feel like doing and then they take what they need, right? So the ultimate vision of Marxism is the abolition of commodity production. However, right, in order to get there, you have socialism, which is the transitional stage. And socialism is when the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power, are rationally controlled. But you're still going to have commodity production under socialism, right? You're going to have, factories where people get paid to work in those factories. They're going to use the money they get paid to buy things they need, commodities, and that there's a difference between socialism, which is a transitional stage, and the ultimate vision of a stateless, classless world. A lot of people don't realize that. They say, well, the Soviet Union had money, so it couldn't be communist. So there you go. A lot of tankies denying the existence of, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Can you repeat that super chat? Denying the existence of trans people or something? What is this? Tankies denying trans people? What is this? Show it to me again. Show it to me again, because it went by way too fast, and I want to answer every super chat. Okay. All right. Tankies denying trans people. What is your take? All right. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, so I answered the commodity production thing. Essential Workers Union. Yeah, I can imagine something like that might happen, because these essential workers, they're taking great risk. Society would fall apart without them right now. One thing I did hear that was very good is apparently the rate of infection in New York City among essential workers has decreased because the masks are working. And that essential workers are not being infected as much. I know that those Amazon workers, the workers at the Amazon warehouse, they were hit very badly. There were a lot of essential workers who were very badly hit by COVID-19. But apparently the rate of infection among essential workers has decreased, and I hope that's I hope that's a fact. I hope that our media is not being deceptive. That's a good thing. And workers need representation on the job, and I can see these essential workers that are so valuable to society saying to society, well, look, we're so valuable. Why don't you let us, pay us a fair wage? And we know about the union drive that went on at Amazon and the way they responded, the way they fired the leader of the union and all of that. So it's ongoing. I mean, these are ongoing situations. And I want to shout out to anyone who is an essential worker. And there are a number of essential workers who listen to this program. There are people that drive trucks who listen to this program. There are people that work in emergency services who listen to this program. I mean, that's just what comes to the top of my head. But there's many essential workers who listen to this program while they're at work. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And you deserve to be treated better, right? At a time like this, I mean, my words, and people probably say this to you all day long. They probably say to you, oh, you're so great. But at the end of the day, you're not seeing the wages you need. You're not seeing the help you need. If you want to form a union and demand that society do what it means, right? Do what it means and, put money behind its words, I think you're absolutely right, right? I feel like there's a lot of applauding of essential workers, but it's not translating into the benefits that they need, into the support that they need. And a lot of essential workers get taken for granted. They get taken for granted, and that's not cool. It's not cool at all. It's funny, Jimmy Hoffa, who was the leader of the Teamsters Union, he had a slogan. He said, if you bought it, then a truck brought it. And that's true. There would be nothing in any of your stores if a truck driver didn't bring it. And that was his basis for fighting for high wages for truck drivers. Now, Jimmy Hoffa is a complicated figure, and we can talk about that, at another time. But, he fought very, very hard for truck drivers in the United States. He'd been trained by the Trotskyite communists in Minneapolis. But he was a Republican. He was close to Nixon. He was right-wing. He played a negative role against the Farm Workers Union, but one thing that he made clear is, if you bought it, a truck brought it. And people take essential workers for granted. That's totally true. Right? Propaganda against the USSR and facts. Well, it's interesting. There's the main way they deceive about the USSR is lying through omission or lying through emphasis. I'm serious. Right? A lot of times you can find factual information, but they just don't emphasize it. I would be sitting in the college class, and they would show us one slide of one starving child from Ukraine and say, this was what happened, socialism doesn't work. I would, in the back of the class, raise my hand and say, now, didn't they, totally industrialize the country, wipe out illiteracy, bring electricity to the whole country, do all of this? And the professor would go, oh, yeah, they did that too. But it's lying through emphasis. They pick the negative things that happen, and they blow them up. That's what Destiny did in the debate that I had with Destiny. Destiny seemed to believe that the entire experience of the farming system in the USSR was famines in the early 1930s. And I said to him, they didn't even have tractors in the USSR in the farming system before the Soviet Union came along. But people, they pick, and this is, again, you'll get a book on Soviet history, and there will be pages and pages and pages and pages and pages and pages on negative things that happened. And then there will be a paragraph, and they also did some stuff to improve living standards. But that's not important. Don't worry about that. That's how they do these things, right? It's lying through emphasis. That's the main way the USSR is denied, is lied about, right? They don't want to talk about the 5-year plans. They don't want to talk about what the whole world knew that was going on. And if you press people, or even if you find the little paragraph in the book, it acknowledges it. It's just you're not allowed to focus on it, and they don't want to talk about it. Another way, one thing is to, look for actual things that are confirmed, because these books on the history of the USSR tend to be full of personal anecdotes. They tend to be full of, well, I was there and I talked to this person. That's not verifiable, right? I can guarantee you, if you go to Miami, you can meet all kinds of people who are from Cuba, and they will tell you all kinds of horrible things. You say to them, the classic story I heard from a friend of mine years ago. She asked a Miami Cuban, she said, I've heard Fidel Castro violates human rights. Can you tell me what human rights he violates? And she said, all of them. And she said, yeah, but what specifically does he do? Everything bad, all of them. He does all of it. It's just, that's how they are. Well, they'll sit there. They've got little anecdotes about, oh, well, my cousin was executed because he was reading books that were critical of the government. And it's like, what was your cousin's name? It's like, and there's a lot of stuff. And, did they actually have a cousin who was executed? Maybe, probably. Who knows, right? Do we know why? You don't know, right? But Just like everyone in the United States thinks they know everything about communism because they talked to a guy who used to live in Eastern Europe who lives down the block from them. You know, you read these history books and they have anecdotes from individuals that are not verifiable. They don't prove anything. They're just kind of, there's a book that was published, my favorite example, not my favorite, one of my favorite examples. There's a book called Mao, the Unknown Story. And George W. Bush endorsed it, and it was in all the bookstores. It was just this hit piece on China, just this hit piece on China, demonizing Mao. And one of the things in the book that it pointed to about, was that it claimed that one of the most important battles in Chinese history didn't happen, right? During the Long March, there was an example that they had to cross this bridge, and the counter-revolutionaries lit the bridge on fire. So all that was left were the metal chains. And so these Red Army soldiers, grabbed the chains and went across the bridge. And it's like considered an epic moment in Chinese history. It's an epic moment. Can you imagine with people shooting at you, being on a bridge and trying to cross this bridge? And it was this moment of great heroism, right? And in the Mao the Unknown Storybook, she says it's all a hoax. Never happened. This battle never happened. It's fake. Fake news, right? Fake. It just didn't happen. What's her source on this, right? That's a big thing. If I claim the Battle of Gettysburg never happened, if I claim the Battle of the Alamo never happened, if I claim that the Battle of Lexington and Concord or some great event from American history never happened, there would be a huge burden of proof on me to confirm that. That's a big thing. So she's saying that one of the most important battles of the Chinese Revolution did not happen. And what's her source? Well, she met this woman who remains nameless, who saw the whole thing and it didn't happen. Wait, what? Or she found some documents, right? That's the other thing. A lot of the source in that book, well, she found some documents. There's some documents that she found that other people can't see. And so, and it's just like, no, you can't deny that one of the most important battles in Chinese history ever happened because you talked to a woman. Well, there was this woman who sold noodles near the site of the battle. She was older. She told me it never happened. No. If you wrote a book saying the Battle of Gettysburg never happened because somebody told you or you found some documents that you can't show anybody else, you would be laughed out of the room. But because it's China, you can say that. And the same with Soviet history. People, I know, Stalin, there's all these quotes people attribute to Stalin, right? The death of one is a tragedy, the death of millions is just a statistic. I mean, did he ever say that? No, but somebody heard or something. No, right? There's no, with these anecdotes, with these personal accounts, there's no fact-checking, there's no skepticism. If somebody escapes from North Korea, if they flee to South Korea, where it's illegal to say anything good about North Korea under the national security laws. South Korea, if you say something positive about North Korea, you go to prison. No one ever talks about that, right? But if you say something good about, in South Korea, they've got all these defectors from North Korea, and they just say shit. Yes, Kim Jong-il owns the world's largest collection of pornography. He claims he invented the hamburger, and it's fact. They said it, didn't they? They were there. They said. It's ridiculous. During slavery in the United States, they would tell slaves, oh, in the North, it's awful. The people in the North, they want to kill you. It's just there are two sides to every story. Number one, but if you're on one side, and I'm writing it down, Solzhenitsyn, there's two sides to every story. There are two sides to every story. There are people who've been hurt. Whenever there's a war, there are people that are hurt on any side of a war. There's bad things that go on. But at the end of the day, you're not talking facts. When you want to talk facts about the USSR, and again, propaganda, you just dig up every personal anecdote. And do they ever print the personal anecdotes from people that have good things to say about the USSR? No. Do they ever print the personal anecdotes from anyone? No. Right? And if somebody does come along and they say, well, Stalin did all this, oh, they're brainwashed. They're just there's a bias. So look for actual facts. That's why I would urge you to distinguish propaganda. Look for economic data. Look for hard facts, number one. Look for lying through emphasis. Look for anecdotes and just look for the actual facts about what actually happened, right? Look for economic data about how people's lives were improved. Stay away from personal anecdotes and stay away from lying through emphasis. I guess that's what I would say about how to judge Soviet history. And also, I would emphasize there's no need to deny that bad things happen. Everyone I've ever read, right, pro-Stalin, anti-Stalin, pro-Soviet, anti-Soviet, admits that the Great Terror, right, or Yezhov Shina, the period where there was a lot of arresting of people by the secret police, a lot of people going to gulags, big crackdown, that was a horrible time, right? The Great Terror, the Great Fear, that was a couple years before World War II started, was an awful time in Soviet history. Now, you know, defenders of Stalin will say, well, Stalin stopped it. He executed Yezhov. He stopped the secret police. Stalin stopped it. Well, okay. Anti-Stalin people, of course, say it was Stalin's plot. He got it all going. He did it all. Well, well, you know, it was a bad time. And there's no reason to deny it was a bad time. And average people were heavily involved in it. It was average people turning each other in. Things are not as complicated as one bad person or one bad. It was a bad time. Regardless, it was a bad time. And when you get up and you make gulag memes or you try to deny that anything bad happened, you look bad. You look stupid, and it's really insensitive to people who lived through it. To people who had grandparents who suffered, because we can admit that the Great Terror was bad, right? We can admit that it was very difficult for the USSR to industrialize. I had an ex-girlfriend from Russia, and said the best years were under Brezhnev. Well, yeah, and every poll in every former socialist country, they say life was better. They say life was better under socialism. That's what they say. Every poll that comes out in every former socialist country, they say life was better, the economy was better, there was no unemployment, the educational levels, the industrialization of the country. There's overwhelming evidence that socialism was economically successful. And the way American media deals with that is it doesn't acknowledge it. It just pretends it's not there. It highlights the bad things. It highlights negative personal anecdotes. All right. So someone is a fascist subscriber of mine. Well, I hope you stop being a fascist, because fascism is death, destruction, and terror. It's an attempt to save capitalism by beating people down and building kind of a police state. But hey, at least you're along. You must have good instincts if you're watching this, because I'm not on here talking about fascism. I'm anti-racist. I talk about the Black Panthers. I talk about the heroic struggles of Black people against racism. I talk about the need to protect people's rights and protect civil liberties. I mean, I'm not a fascist, but if you're enjoying the show, that means there's a part of you that probably has a goodness in you. Maybe you're confused, and so I hope you're along for the ride. Damien Phil says, any thoughts on the scholarship of Grover Furr? I mean, the book by him that I would recommend the strongest is called Blood Lies. It's a great book, and it picks apart Timothy Snyder of Yale. And Grover just shows that Timothy Snyder, the head of the anti-Russian studies department at Yale, is a hack. And take a look at what Grover writes. He rips Timothy Snyder. Timothy Snyder wrote this book attempting to equate the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany, and to argue that in Eastern Europe, well, it starts out, he says something to the effect of, it's easy to try and admire anti-fascist fighters in Eastern Europe, and that's the message of the book, is that the Soviet Union was somehow worse than Nazi Germany, or just as bad as Nazi Germany. And he goes to great dishonest lengths to misrepresent documents. Grover goes into the archives. He shows what the documents actually say. And he shows that Timothy Snyder is not honest. That's a great book by Grover. Great, it's great. I recommend Blood Lies. That you read that book, and if your head doesn't explode with rage at anti-communist scholarship, and how does this guy Timothy Snyder? He's like a talking head in Michael Moore movies. He's this liberal anti-fascism, anti regimes they don't like guru. And if you look at his book Bloodlands, Grover rips it to shreds in Blood Lies and shows that Timothy Snyder is, in order to feed this anti-Russian narrative, is pretty problematic. You mentioned your grandmother was a Lutheran. Have you read much about Martin Luther and have any thoughts? I'll write that down because you're jumping ahead of the line. So all right, Martin Luther. All right, okay. All right, so we did the fascist subscriber, the LGBTQ potential. Well, I don't know what you want me to say there. I mean, I know Harry Hay, who was one of the first gay rights activists in the history of the United States, was a member of the Communist Party. Um, you know, um, yeah, I mean, Lillian Hellman, who wrote the first play promoting gay rights. It was called The Children's Hour. It was a hit Broadway play in the 30s that it was about. It was about a couple, two women. They have an orphanage, um, and a rumor starts that they are lesbians, and they're not, and it destroys them, and it just destroys them. Um, and it was a hit play on Broadway, and it showed how the anti-gay hysteria is problematic, and it has a very sad ending. And she was a communist, and her writing, her novels and stuff, she hinted at lesbianism. She was married to a man. She was actually married to the guy who wrote what is it, the Maltese Falcon, who was also a member of the Communist Party. He was a Dashiell Hammett, who was a novelist. But she was married to a man, but her writings seemed to hint at lesbianism a lot. She was a communist, and she wrote The North Star, which is a very good movie about Ukrainian villagers fighting the Nazi invaders. She was a communist. Leslie Feinberg was part of the Workers' World Party, and she was kind of the founder of the transgender movement. So I can see why people would think that there is definitely revolutionary potential there. I will say also, though, that a lot of gay rights activism nowadays is paid for by big foundations and such, and that for example, in New York City at the LGBT Center, for a long time, I don't know if they still have this, but for a long time they banned any Palestine related event from taking place there because the LGBT Center of New York City was, it got a lot of funding from pro-Israeli people. And and there was like, I remember years ago, I even went to an event when I was an activist where it was like Arab American activists going into the LGBT Center in defiance of that rule and like having their pro-Palestine event in the LGBT Center in defiance of the LGBT Center's ban on pro-Palestine events. That was pretty wild. The other thing is that and I think it's funny. Leslie Feinberg in her final years, I mean, she died, but she had been politically inactive. She had Lyme disease very badly, and so I met her a few times, and we talked on the phone a few times when she was still politically active. Then the Lyme disease kind of got her, and she wasn't really politically active, and then she died. So there's many years where she was alive, but she was not politically active. So I caught her at just the end of her political activism. And one thing, and I remember she was speaking at that point. She was going around talking about how the gay rights movement and the LGBT movement was being used against Iran. It was being used against Cuba, and how regime change rhetoric, there had been a co-opting of the LGBT language. And she was somebody who went back to the 70s and the early LGBT rights movement. And she was furious about it because she was anti-imperialist. She was pro-Cuba, pro-Palestine, pro-DPRK, pro-Iran. She was Jewish, she was transgender, but she did not approve of Western capitalism. And she was horrified seeing that the movement that she had given her life to was becoming a propaganda use. And she wrote articles refuting, for example, that, this claim that in Iran, they hang all gay people. Well, that's not true, right? There was a photo going around. And I remember at my college, the LGBT group put up this poster of two guys hanging. And they said the reason, the Iranian president says that there's no gay people in Iran is because he kills them all. Well, those two men were hung for raping somebody. That was for raping an underage boy. These two men, grabbed an underage boy and they both raped him. Well, they were hanged for that. They weren't hanged for being gay, right? And there's an attempt to hijack the gay movement, to spread imperialism. And Leslie Feinberg, as somebody who had real big credentials in the LGBT movement, was very furious about that. And she wrote about it with Cuba. And how Cuba has really changed. There were, in the early years of the Cuban Revolution, they basically, and it's told, the way that they interpret it now is they'll say, well, Cuba had labor camps for homosexuals. That's not exactly right. I mean, it's close, but what it was that in Cuba, and still in Cuba, everyone has to join the military. They have compulsory military service. And if you cannot join the military, right, if you're disabled, if you're religious, like Jehovah's Witnesses are not allowed to join the military, then you do farm labor, right? And in the early years of the revolution, they didn't allow gay people in the military. If you were known to be gay, you weren't allowed in the military. And so gay people did farm labor. And there was a lot of degrading and shaming of the people who did farm labor, right? Because it was thought that, oh, you're not doing the military, you're not a real man, you're not tough, and a lot of, insert anti-gay slur here. And so there was a lot of shaming of people who did farm labor, and they forced gay people. Gay people were not allowed to serve in the Cuban military, and there was a lot of degrading and shaming of them, right? When they would come into an area to do the farm labor, people would spit on them and degrade them. It was awful. And Fidel Castro apologized for that. He said that was unacceptable. That was a huge error that they made, right? It was a big, big, big mistake that was made in the early years of the revolution, that they, forced gay people and disabled people and people that were, Jehovah's Witnesses or religious groups that wouldn't serve in the military. They forced them to do this farm labor, and they treated them badly. They were shamed and humiliated and degraded in the process. They were treated like, okay, because you won't serve in the military, you're not loyal to the country, and it was wrong. And Fidel apologized for it. Now in Cuba, they include LGBT stuff in their education, their sex education for children. They don't have gay marriage, but they do. They have civil unions, and I actually met Mariela Castro years ago. She's Raul Castro's daughter, and she went around the country speaking about Cuba's gay rights programs and their reforms. So it's complicated. But what was interesting is when I met with Mariela Castro at this event years ago, one of the things she talked about is how the Cuban Communist Party is more pro-LGBT than the population is. And actually, a lot of Cubans have become fundamentalist Baptists, right? There's many Cubans who, they allow Christian missionaries from the United States to come there. And a lot of Cubans are more anti-gay than the government is, right? And that's part of the reason why gay marriage isn't legal. If Mariela Castro and the Communist Party had their way, gay marriage would probably be legal. But the population, most of the Cuban population are Catholic. Some of them are... Grover Furr also showed that the Great Terror was Yezhov's work, not Stalin's. Right, that's what I said. I said that's a position, so I addressed that already. But yeah, that there's a lot of feeling in Cuba that the population practices Santeria, practices Catholicism, practices Baptist religion, and that a lot of the people in Cuba are not as pro-gay as the Communist Party is. So it's complicated. It's very complicated, that's kind of how it is. And that, there is the old line, right? I mean, it used to be that communist parties felt that homosexuality was what they called bourgeois decadence, right? And up until the 80s, most communist parties did not allow homosexual members. They had a position that homosexuality was a deviation caused by capitalism, and that was the position, right? And that it was, the Workers' World Party. They were pro-LGBT from the beginning. The ISO, the Trotskyite organization, they were pro-LGBT from the beginning. And within the Communist Party, there were gay people like Harry Hay. Harry Hay started something called Bachelors for Wallace. That was a group of gay men who supported Henry Wallace when the Communist Party was supporting him. But he was gay, but he was very discreet, and I think they eventually kind of pushed him out of the Communist Party because he was gay. So, it wasn't really until the 80s. It wasn't until like the AIDS movement and all of that you got communist groups changing their position. Some changed it later than others. But it was a shift. I mean, it took a while, and yeah, I guess, so I hope that answers the question the person had. I'm just giving you the history of communists and the gay movement. So there you go. Now, somebody asked me, would I want to have a chat with Jyoti Brar about the Workers' Party? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That conversation I had with Jyoti Brar was wild. She said a lot of amazing stuff about classical music, about socialist countries, and I would love to have her on again. Yeah, I would reach out to her anytime. She gives a great interview, I'll tell you that much. Alrighty. Do I believe that Turkmenistan has 0 cases? Someone else is asking me, repeating about trans-tanky stuff. Well, do I believe Turkmenistan has 0 cases? I haven't been following the situation in Turkmenistan. Sorry. Is it possible they have 0 cases? I mean, Yeah, I mean, maybe they just haven't been in touch with the outside world. Maybe they've had proper safety precautions. I haven't been following that particular controversy. Maybe that's not true. I don't know. I haven't been following it. Can't give you an answer. Plandemic conspiracy theories. Yeah, I saw that there's this movie called Plandemic that they have banned on Facebook. If you post it on Facebook, they take it away or something. They ban it. You know, and I understand. I mean, there's people who claim that the pandemic is fake, and I mean, that's ridiculous. I know people who've had it, right? I know. I mean, I'm in New York City, and among people, I mean, I haven't been in contact with them. I don't have it, but and people that are in my circle that I know, Facebook, and people who know people I know, and yeah, it's real, folks. It's a real pandemic. It's not fake. It's not a hoax, and I understand that people are distrustful of the government, but it's the real thing. Bill Gates is a Malthusian. The Eastern establishment, they're Malthusians, but I don't think that I mean, how did they release this? I mean, you can't, I don't know. I mean, it's one, I mean, no, it's not a plandemic. It's real. And you don't, releasing a germ is not something you could stage, right? I mean, it's very hard to like predict where it will go and all of that. So, yeah, I'm not buying that stuff. I think people should be allowed to say it if they want to say it. I'm not for censorship. I think that there should be free discussion on social media. And I don't like, the term conspiracy theory, the way that's what you do. If you don't agree with something, it's conspiracy theory. I'll tell you what is a conspiracy theory. The idea that Russia rigged the U.S. elections to get Trump elected is a ridiculous conspiracy theory that no proof has ever been presented for. But it's allowed, right? When they tried to kill Maduro with a drone, do people remember that? They tried to kill Maduro with a drone. They tried to kill Maduro with a drone. And, I mean, they stopped it. They shot down the drone. And then multiple articles were written in Western media claiming that Maduro had staged the whole thing. It was a false flag. That's a conspiracy theory. I mean, it's just, if you don't like Russia, you can make up some wild theory about it and, you're fine. But, if you criticize anything, if you say, I don't think the USA was really trying to rescue the Libyan people by destroying Libya, conspiracy theory, it's just the bias of our media, the bias of society. I guess, and I mean, I'm not a fan of Bill Gates. I'm not a fan of the Eastern establishment. I'm writing a book exposing how they've manipulated the socialist movement. But at the same time, I mean, I really doubt that they, planned to release COVID-19 or something. That's ridiculous. So, I mean, there you go. Alrighty. Someone's asking me, tankies denying trans people. What is your take? I don't know enough about it. I mean, obviously there are transgendered people in the world. I mean, they exist. And I'm not in favor of hate crimes against such people. I'm not in favor of discrimination. I think such people should be allowed to live their lives. And I know they face a lot of harsh treatment and bullying and hate crimes, and it's hard for them to get employment and jobs. Their families can be very cruel to them sometimes. So I sympathize with trans people. I'm not in favor of anyone being mistreated. And they certainly exist. I'm here in New York City, and I mean, there's a lot of trans people. So trans people exist, and I don't believe they should be mistreated. And that I mean, it's the sad thing that you see. Iran's perspective, what do you know about the socialist perspective as well as China and Russia's dealing with them? Dealing with them, what do they mean? I don't quite understand the question, but, there's a lot of there's men, that will just hate trans women. Why? How does it bother you, right? If a woman is a trans woman, but it's there's certain men that are just they see a trans woman and they just have to go crazy, because, and it's they think it's somehow a threat to their masculinity to be around a trans woman. That's unacceptable, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about it. And, people want to get into a bigger conversation about women's sports and things like that. I don't want to go there because I don't know enough about it. But as far as hate crimes, bullying, discrimination, not in favor of any of that. I'm opposed to that. And I know trans people have a tough time. And I'm sorry that happens, and that shouldn't happen. I don't think anyone should be mistreated because of their identity. So, I hope that answers your question. But I'm not ready to go, you want to talk about women's sports or rape survivor groups or bathrooms, and I'm not ready to go there with you. Okay, I'm just telling you, I don't think anyone should be discriminated against. I don't think anyone should be beaten up. I don't think people should be messed with. And it sickens me the way some people just kind of fixate on hating trans people. It's not right. And there's something wrong. And that, why can't you sympathize? Right? And I must say this, there's a certain type of person, and this is well beyond the trans issue. This is just, well beyond. There's a certain type of person who just doesn't have the ability to be angry at capitalism. They don't have the ability to be angry at capitalism. They can't be mad at the government. They can't be mad at the military. So they have to be mad at somebody. But that has to be somebody that is weaker than them, right? You think about New York City, there's a lot of, trans women who sex work or on the street and sex work, and they talk about they get harassed by the police and all of that. And it's like, prostitution is a horrible thing. I mean, capitalism drives people into situations where they're doing that to survive. And, but at the same time, it's like, so, you can't be mad at the billionaire ruling class. You can't be mad at the bosses and the bankers. You can't be mad at the Pentagon and the wars that they wage, but you're going to be mad at, somebody, a transgender, sex worker on the street trying to get by. Really? What does that say about you as a person? And a lot of conservatives are like that in a lot of ways. They can't be mad at the government. They can't be mad at the military. They can't be mad at the rich, but they can be mad at like low-income people because they get welfare. They can be mad. I mean, it's just, it's not acceptable. Not acceptable. I hope that answers your question. The next question I was asked was about Solzhenitsyn. Well, I mean, I think you know what I think about Solzhenitsyn. Not a big fan, but his writing is everywhere, just like George Orwell. I mean, we get it pumped into us. I mean, A Day in the Life of Ivan whatever, and the Gulag Archipelago, and he had some views that I think if a lot of these kind of liberal folks who promoted him really looked into, they wouldn't be particularly fond of. He was pretty far to the right, but he's one of those people we just can't escape in the United States. We're just constantly Solzhenitsyn. If you learn Russian history in the USA, you're going to learn lots of Solzhenitsyn. And that's just kind of how it is. And, it's an aspect of the anti-communist bias in our culture. All right, Martin Luther. I was asked about Martin Luther. Martin Luther was the leader of the Reformation. He was in Germany. He nailed his thesis to the wall of a church. My grandmother was a Lutheran. She converted to Lutheranism. Her father was from Ireland, I believe. Was a coal miner, and I think he was Protestant, though. She grew up Protestant, but I think he was a Baptist or something. But she became a Lutheran in college. She went to a Lutheran college. My grandmother converted to Lutheranism. And I actually grew up in the United Church of Christ, UCC. But at the time I was born, my family had not yet joined the United Church of Christ. So I was actually baptized as a Lutheran. I was baptized in a Lutheran church as an infant. Every so often we would go to church with my grandmother. We'd go to the Lutheran church. The church my grandmother went to was really, really small. It was like just up the road from where she lived, and it was tiny. It was very, very small. It was this little tiny Lutheran church in the middle of a bunch of cornfields. It's where her memorial was held after she died. It's just surrounded. There's not any buildings. Across the street from it, here beside it, it's all just So someone's asking me about the Soviet Union's role in defeating fascism. The fact that they erode it, they erode the Soviet Union's role in defeating fascism. It's unbelievable. I don't know if you saw, Trump tweeted out, this is the day that Britain and the United States defeated fascism. They're leaving out, 26 million Soviet people died in the fight against Hitler. Prior to the Second World War, the Soviet Union went to all the Western countries and tried to form an anti-fascist alliance. France had one with them briefly, and then, stopped. But the United States would not align with the Soviets. In Spain. All right. So I got another super chat. I went by way too fast. All right, I'm answering the Soviet thing. I got a lot more to say about Soviet anti-fascism. But what's that went by about paranoia or something? Stalin paranoia or something? Castro went by really fast. I think much of the paranoia can be directly attributed to the threats of violence from invasion. That's a very good point. All right, we'll address that. Threats, violence. Okay, we'll address that next after I finish the Soviet thing. I mean, the role of the Soviet Union in defeating fascism, it's been erased from history. I mean, I have met numerous people who think that Hitler was a communist. That's commonly believed in the United States. People say Hitler was a communist. Hitler was not a communist. The communists were the biggest anti-fascists, but that's been eroded. It's been completely eroded. My gym teacher, I remember when I explained, he was the gym teacher and the health teacher at my high school. Remember I said I was a communist? He said, oh, you're just like Hitler. I said, no, no. And I started to explain what I wanted, what I believed in, about everyone being guaranteed health care and jobs. And he told me, oh, he said, that's what they have in Canada. It's called Commonwealth, where you hold the wealth in common. This is the man who was educating me as a young person. This was my gym and health teacher. It's the Commonwealth, where they hold the wealth in common. But Hitler was a communist. Communist just means dictator. That's what I learned in school. And people don't know that the communists were fighting Hitler. You know, they had the what do you call it? The Red Front Fighters League, right? And they were in the streets fighting the Nazis. They had underground resistance. Ernst Thälmann, there was anti-fascism was a big part of what communists did in the 1930s. They built the People's Front. And then the Soviet Union, I mean, you read about the Battle of Stalingrad. I mean, just amazing heroism from the Soviet people. The Great Patriotic War is what they refer to the Second World War as. And it was a moment. I mean, I went to an event for the commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp at the UN. And it was a joint event by the Soviet Union and Israel to commemorate the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp. People ignore the fact that it was Soviet troops that freed the prisoners from Auschwitz concentration camp. You know, the Soviet people, played a tremendous role and gave so much. I mean, everyone in the Soviet Union had a family member or a relative who died in the Second World War. Or, imagine 26 million people. That's such a huge devastation. And, I mean, the amount of sacrifice. The Soviet Union's role in defeating fascism was tremendous. It was astronomical. And that was widely acknowledged during the Second World War. There's a great movie, The Battle of Russia, which was produced. It was like shown to U.S. troops. You can watch Mission to Moscow, which was a film made based on the diaries of the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, where they portray the Soviet Union's anti-fascist work as heroic. They've got, there's a lot. Lillian Hellman, I mentioned her before. She made a great movie called, what was it called? It was called North Star, The North Star, and it was about Ukrainian villagers fighting off the invaders. It was pretty good. And people, that was why after the Second World War in France, the Communist Party expanded to millions. In Italy, the Communist Party almost won the elections. All across the world, communists were widely loved for their role in defeating fascism. They were thought of as being the anti-fascists. That's why, the World Democratic Youth, the World Federation of Democratic Youth, that's the organization that unites all the communists, youth organizations from around the world, it's called Democratic Youth because they were against fascism, right? The World Festival of Youth and Students, this world gathering that the Soviet Union started convening every 4 years. Our first one was in 1947 in Czechoslovakia, and it was a gathering of anti-fascist, anti-imperialist youth, and that the understanding that's put forward in Arpalm Dutt's book on fascism, it's put forward in a lot of the writing from that period, is that capitalism naturally leads toward fascism, right? When capitalism enters a crisis, it moves toward fascism, and communists position themselves as the leaders of an anti-fascist popular front. That the working class is the only class that really will ultimately gain from the overthrow of capitalism. And so because they will not go along with the overthrow of bourgeois democracy, they're going to fight against fascism, and they're going to lead the pole of society as anti-fascist. Popular Front theory. Georgy Dimitrov, who was he was a Bulgarian leader of the Communist International. He wrote a lot about fascism, how fascism naturally develops from capitalism. And this is important stuff, right? And again, people forget the role the Soviet Union played. And they're having great Victory Day celebrations. Super Chat just went by. What did it say? I don't want to miss it. Right. I just don't want to miss it. what it was. I think it was EE Camp did the super chat, if I'm recognizing. I just don't want to miss what they said. Yeah, the blame for the COVID-19 pandemic by our China. Okay, we'll get to that. Well, first of all, the question about threats of violence and paranoia. Yeah, I mean, the socialist countries never had a moment of peace. Never had a moment of peace. Never did they have a moment of peace. And they were always under attack. And they were fighting for their lives. And so when a society is under threat and locked down, the ability to be purely democratic and egalitarian kind of slips away. I mean, they're forced to adopt more of a militarized barracks kind of way of existing, right? And that's just a reality. And you can't deny that. People want to make it like, well, the Soviet Union, they could have just been purely democratic. If I'd have been there, I would have done this. That's not how these things work, right? And that, the Soviet Union became the way it was. Cuba has been the way it is because they're trying to survive. And they're in a sea of hostile capitalism. They're trying to organize their economy. They're trying to raise their people out of poverty. They're facing attack. They're facing people that are far more ruthless than they are, and they're trying to do their best they can. And I mean, I would like a society that's as free and open as possible, but that can't happen when countries are under siege and under attack. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying that the problems that the socialist countries have had are good. I'm saying that there's a reason they existed, and that reason wasn't evil Stalin, right? There's a reason that societies have to lock down. There's a reason that these countries have had to develop a rigid mechanism for defending socialism. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. And it's not, you don't get a blank piece of paper when you have a revolution, a blank piece of paper that just says, oh, build your ideal society. It's not how it works, right? You build it in the context of the existing world. I'm going to take another drink of orange juice. Blaming China for COVID-19. That is infuriating to me. China, they had the COVID-19 breakout there. They waited 6 days to find out what the hell was going on. They didn't know what was going on. They were trying to figure out what was going on. They figured out what was going on. They didn't want there to be mass panic. They figured out what was going on. They had the answer, and then they warned the entire world. And they told the entire world what was going on. They said, we got COVID-19. And at the time, you'll remember, two things happened back in January. Two things happened. First, Western media started saying that their crackdown, doctor's plot. The first thing that happened was they said that their crackdown was authoritarian. Oh my God, China's being so authoritarian. Look how extreme they're being. They're overreacting. So we said they were overreacting. China was trying to warn us, oh, we've got this, COVID-19. They said they were overreacting, number one. Number two, Donald Trump tweeted out, oh, President Xi is doing a great job. He's doing a great job. It wasn't until we got it over here and things started falling apart over here, all of a sudden, it became China's fault. The blame China for this narrative started in response to the failures of U.S. leaders. They needed somebody to blame, right? Trump said China was doing a great job. U.S. media said China was being too authoritarian. Oh my God, look how extreme they're being. They're overreacting. They're creating hysteria. Meanwhile, Dianne Feinstein, other members of Congress were selling their stocks. And they knew it was going to be bad, but they were the ones. You want to talk about people who didn't warn us, who didn't prepare? That's the U.S. government, right? We've seen that they sold their stocks. They were doing insider trading. They knew what was going on. Oh, they knew. They knew. I mean, it's pure projection, right? The Chinese government, the World Health Organization, they took 6 days to figure out what was going on. They didn't know what was going on, and they figured it out, right? And they figured it out, and then they warned the entire world. They sent masks to the entire world. They've been working with the World Health Organization to try and find a cure. And no, I mean, this narrative that somehow it's all China's fault is so off the wall and ridiculous. So off the wall and ridiculous. Yeah, absolutely. The doctor's plot, anti-Semitic. Well, I mean, I've looked into it a little bit. I guess the allegation is that this word, there was a word cosmopolitan that was used in response to this was, there was a crackdown. There was some kind of, crack down on some people that were trying to kill Stalin or something like that. They call it the Doctor's Plot, and some people felt like it's widely felt that there was some kind of anti-Semitic innuendo in it or something. I don't know enough about it. I know there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union, and historically there was. The Soviet government, cracked down on it. Right? Deng versus Gorbachev. The Soviet government cracked down on anti-Semitism, and wouldn't allow it in the media, and they did a lot to try and control it. But among the population, there was a lot of anti-Semitic feeling, going back many, many thousands of years, right? I mean, it's just, there was anti-Semitism. I mean, you talk about the pogroms and all of that. And that the Bolshevik Party, the communists, tried to control it, and they tried to restrict it, and they tried to repress it. And, you read Lenin's speeches against anti-Semitism. But it was there among the population. Those kind of feelings were there. Yeah, I mean, was the Doctor's Plot a reflection of that anti-Semitic undercurrent? It doesn't appear that way to me, but that allegation is commonly leveled by anti-communists. I don't know enough about it. I mean, I've heard that most of the people that were arrested in the Doctor's Plot thing weren't Jewish, from what I understand, but they claim that the word cosmopolitan was used, and that was a code for Jew or something, and I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know enough about it. Can't give you a clear answer there. Deng versus Gorbachev. Well, Deng Xiaoping, what was the big difference between Deng and Gorbachev? Well, the biggest difference was that Deng Xiaoping was a communist. If you read Deng Xiaoping's writings, he understood Marxism, he believed in Marxism, and he said this is necessary to strengthen socialism, right? This is, China's a poor country. We need to adjust in order to strengthen socialism. He framed his arguments in Marxist ways. Gorbachev, on the other hand, started saying that Marxism was wrong. He started saying that we need universal human values rather than class struggle. He started, if you look at it, Gorbachev was rapidly unraveling Marxism, whereas Deng Xiaoping, he was not saying Marxism or socialism was wrong. He was adamant that socialism and Marxism was correct. He was just saying we need to apply it strategically and in a different way. That's one difference. The other difference is that China and Russia are very, very different countries. The other difference is that Gorbachev was not from the generation that made the revolution. Deng was on the Long March with Mao. Deng Xiaoping was on the Long March with Mao. He was one of the founding fathers of modern China. Gorbachev was the new generation that hadn't been part of it, so there was a generational change in Russia, whereas China was not having that generational gap. So there are some key differences, absolutely some key differences. But Gorbachev and Deng, and they played different roles. On top of that, I think that China, because it's such a big country, even though the Communist Party very much marched as one, there's a wide variety of views, and that Deng was kind of always negotiating, just like President Xi is kind of negotiating the centrist position, kind of keeping different wings of the party happy, whereas I think Gorbachev, it was much more centralized. I mean, the tragedy of the Gorbachev era that I've heard is that the people in the rank and file, if you went to, and I talked to people who went to Russia in the 80s, went to the Soviet Union in the 80s, and they would talk about how the older folks, the local party leaders, still believed in communism, and a lot of them still liked Stalin. But it was the higher-ups, it was the leaders, the people in that were high up in the party that didn't believe in socialism, that didn't believe in Marxism. It was the ones in the high-ranking positions that were saying, oh, class struggle is so out of date and all of that. But it was, you had these older folks who'd been through World War II and all of that. They were still communists. A lot of the lower levels of the party they called them the conservative opposition. And that you had a lot of anti-revisionists in the rank and file of the Soviet Communist Party. It was the leadership, right, that had become kind of enamored with the West, that really liked Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and really was kind of just, whatever. They were just, they were kind of saying, well, Marxism is, do we really? I mean, they were the ones that had those problematic views, which is kind of fascinating, I think. But there you go. Okay, what else is on people's minds, right? I'm sitting here, we're Corona streaming, a lot of super chats tonight, keep it rolling in. I'll talk about what you want to talk about. Yeah, someone's saying there's a lot of, whatever. I always tell people, don't feed the trolls. Don't feed the trolls. If someone's in the chat saying, stuff, just whatever. Don't feed the trolls. Don't feed the trolls. That's my policy. Don't feed the trolls. And a lot of times people that just say nasty things, they want attention. The more you acknowledge them, the more they get it, right? Same thing with me. A lot of people have said to me, Caleb, so-and-so said this about you. Why don't you make a video about it? That's what they want. That's what they want. That's what these people want. That's what these people want. Okay? I'm sorry. I mean, it's like, oh, so and so said this about you. Why don't you just make a video and then no one will say that again? No, not how it works, folks. Not how it works. I make a video and then they say, see? And I mean, it empowers them, right? I don't, I mean, sure, I'll talk about my own life. I'll talk about myself here. I'll talk about politics, but you don't feed the trolls, you know? When people, I mean, can you talk about, I don't even know what that is. I've never heard of that prison. I mean, yeah, people are, it's like there's this kind of like, whatever, but I don't know what that is, so I can't answer that. But yeah, don't feed the trolls. That's kind of my policy. Don't feed the trolls. Yeah. Why do you think the Soviet Union recognized Israel? Very good question, right? Interesting. Now, if you read writings from the Communist Party or, the Soviet Union and all of that, they were anti-Zionist. And the World Zionist Organization said that Marxism was its greatest enemy. Jacob Schiff. A lot of people talk about Jacob Schiff, right? This is the basis of this fascist lie that the Soviet Union was created by Israel or Zionism or something like that, or Wall Street. Well, Jacob Schiff, he funded this anti-Tsarist group, the Russian Freedom Group, but then he funded the World Zionist Organization, and they hated Marxists. And, you read the pamphlets of Lenin, of Stalin on the national question, they say Zionism is a reactionary trend among the Jewish bourgeoisie. They were anti-Zionist. There's a pamphlet by Earl Browder from the 1930s on Zionism, where he explains to the Jewish community, when the Communist Party had a lot of Jewish Americans in it, why the Communist Party was vehemently opposed to Zionism. And they considered Zionism, the settlements, in Palestine, the Balfour Declaration to be a British imperialist project. The Communist Party was anti-Zionist through and through. After World War II, right? There had been the Holocaust. There had been, mass death. There were many Jewish refugees from all over the world. After World War II, the Soviet Union voted to create Israel in the United Nations. And I think that there was a feeling at that time that there were so many Jewish refugees and that Jewish people around the world were so progressive. And that was true, that the Communist parties, a lot of Jewish members were supporters of Roosevelt, or maybe they weren't communists, but they were progressive and they were leftists. And there was kind of an illusion on the part of many progressive people, including Henry Wallace. There was an illusion that Israel would be a socialist progressive society, right? And that the main party in Israel when it was established was Haganah, or the Israeli Labor Party, which was like a social democratic party. And there was a feeling in Israel, the Zionist movement, the way they presented themselves, it was going to be one big kibbutz, one big socialist commune in the desert. They weren't going to hire Palestinians because that would be exploiting them. And, they had this whole, and they were going to, it was going to be this progressive country. And, well, the Soviet Union took the wrong position. They were wrong. And, it wasn't just the Soviet Union. Henry Wallace, the Communist Party USA, they took the wrong position. Roosevelt, from what I understand, he took the right position. He was anti-Israel from the beginning. That's why he's demonized. Israel still hates Roosevelt. That there are people who worked in the White House that said if Roosevelt had lived, there would never have been an Israel. Because Roosevelt was vehemently opposed to the project to create Israel. He kicked the rabbis and others who came to him to pitch the Israel project. He kicked them out of his office. He had no use for them. FDR was very, very anti-Israel. And that's why he's demonized. There's a huge effort to claim FDR is complicit in the Holocaust, which is ridiculous. FDR, got a U.S. public that was unwilling to get into World War II to go in and fight for it. Roosevelt, he fought with Congress to try and welcome, Jewish refugees in the United States. But, there's a huge effort to demonize Roosevelt because he was anti-Israel. In fact, the Jerusalem Post, when Obama quoted Roosevelt in a speech, God forbid, the Jerusalem Post wrote an article, Obama must be anti-Semitic. He quoted Roosevelt. Roosevelt was, no president up until Roosevelt had been as loved by American Jews as Roosevelt. But that didn't matter, right? He was anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, so it didn't matter. Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, now she was a supporter of Israel, but he disagreed with her. And he told her, and it's written in her diaries, he told her, there's Arabs living in that land too. This is a disaster. This can't happen. FDR was very opposed to the idea of creating Israel. But he was loved by American Jews, and he actually appointed, Jewish people into his administration, like Henry Morgenthau and others. The Communist Party had a lot of Jewish members. They were big supporters of Roosevelt, but Roosevelt was opposed to Israel and went on the record, and you can read about it, and that he's not forgiven for this. The Israeli history books and all of them talk about Roosevelt with just scorn and hatred. Roosevelt is just hated by Israel for this. And they have tried to say, that he didn't bomb trains. He could have prevented people from being killed in the Holocaust. Well, I've heard that disputed, that the military, the planes couldn't stretch that far into territory. There's just been a big effort to try and convince Americans that somehow, even though Roosevelt aligned with the Soviet Union and Britain to defeat the Nazis, had been anti-fascist from the beginning, had been warning about the dangers of fascism his whole career, somehow Roosevelt is responsible for the Holocaust, and that's not the case. But they have worked very hard to try and make that case because he was so anti-Israel, right? The Zionist folks who tried to meet with him, they said meeting with him was like meeting with a rattlesnake. It's really unfortunate. But Roosevelt was correct. And I understand there were some Trotskyites who were anti-Israel from the beginning. That's to their credit. But the Communist Party, they made a mistake. And the World Communist Movement did. But what's interesting is, it was in 1967, the 67 war, that you had the Communist Party, the Communist Party officially denounce Israel. They had you had the Soviet Union recognizing the Palestine Liberation Organization, like having diplomatic relations with them. But way before that, in the 1950s even, you started to see distrust of Israel among the socialist countries. In Czechoslovakia, there were executions of Israeli spies, people who'd been doing intelligence work for Israel. And there were like big crackdowns in the Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s. They started to realize that Israel was not their friend. And they realized they'd made a mistake. But it may have been as simple as the fact that, the Soviet Union had this big international movement of people that supported it and were friendly to it, called the Communist Movement, right? The Communist International. It had been dissolved, but there were still communist parties all over the world. And among those communist parties, there were many Jewish people, and those Jewish folks were largely supportive of Israel. They were horrified by what happened with the Holocaust. They thought we need a country of our own, and based on that, it may have been simply that the Soviet Union felt like, because we have so many Jewish allies, we need to just go along with this. And that may have been what happened. I don't know. I wasn't in the room, but I do know that up until World War II, the Soviet Union was vehemently anti-Israel. After World War II, they voted to create Israel. And in the 50s, and then in 1967, they started supporting the Palestine Liberation Organization. And they were anti-Israel. And in fact, there were sanctions imposed on the Soviet Union by the United States in the 1980s because claiming the Soviet Union was oppressing Jews. I bet you didn't know that. But yeah, and the Jewish Defense League, the JDL, they attacked the Soviet orchestra when they performed in New York City. In the 70s and 80s, Israel saw the Soviets as their enemy. That was vehemently clear, very clear. And one of the strong arguments against the Soviet Union in American media was the Soviet Union was anti-Semitic, and that was very widespread. They didn't allow circumcision in the Soviet Union. It was illegal to circumcise children in the Soviet Union, right? Well, that was said to be oppressing Jews because circumcision is a big part of their religion. It was said that in the Soviet Union, still to this day, what's interesting is the biggest menorah in the entire world is in the Soviet Union. And actually, what's interesting is in the 1930s, Stalin created the Jewish Autonomous Region because there was a feeling that because Jews were a nationality recognized in the Soviet House of Nationalities, they should have a national territory. So they kind of created a little Israel within the Soviet Union, a Jewish national territory in the Soviet Union called the Jewish Autonomous Region. And that's a weird story. And then that used to be one of the main arguments against Zionism. I've heard this from people in New York City who were, who knew people who were around during this time, is that, they would disrupt. The Communist Party would go to Zionist meetings and disrupt and say, you don't need Israel. In the Soviet Union, there's the Jewish autonomous region. That was an argument that was used. So I hope that answers your question, Sami. I know it's an important question. It's an interesting one. But yeah, I think that voting to create Israel was probably the biggest mistake the Soviet Union ever made. It was a big mistake. And it was the balance of forces coming out of World War II. It was the fact that the Jewish people were represented overwhelmingly in the communist parties around the world. It was based on an understanding that Israel would be a progressive country, which was an illusion. It was a settler state. It was definitely not. But it was a confusion. What I think is also interesting is that Israeli politics has really, it's gradually gone more and more to the right. When Israel was founded, you had the Haganah, the Labor Party, but it's been a gradual march rightward. And that Netanyahu and his alliance with Trump, we're in the age of Netanyahu. We see Israel has marched so far to the right. Israel presented itself as a very left-wing country when it was founded, and it is becoming, Menachem Begin, the administration of Menachem Begin, when he was the Israeli prime minister, that was a turning point. The Likud party, in the late 70s when you had Menachem Begin come into power, there was hope, actually. That, in the 70s, there was hope because the Ba'athist Arab socialism had been such a big movement throughout the Middle East. Arab nationalism was rising in the 60s and 70s. And there was actually some hope that the Soviet Union, people don't know about this, but the Soviet Union was talking about, bringing irrigation to the Middle East. And there was a lot of proposals for the Soviet Union to work with both Israel and the Arab countries to irrigate the Middle East. Right? And that the Ba'ath countries and the Soviet Union and Israel would all come together and have a mass industrialization project of the region. And there was hope for this, and the Soviets were open to it, and the Ba'ath countries were open to it, and Israel was somewhat open to it. And then Menachem Begin came in, and that was the end of that. People don't talk about that. That there was a plan to bring peace to the Middle East via industrialization, and that doesn't get discussed. And that the Ba'ath, the Ba'ath were anti-Israel. They funded Palestinian resistance, and they funded armed opposition to Israel and stuff. But the Ba'ath, their main focus was freeing the Arab people, and that meant industrialization. And that's the main thing, is the reason the Middle East is such a contentious region is because oil is the most important commodity in our economy. They have so much of it, and, and it's been a curse, right? They haven't been able to industrialize. The Ba'ath countries, Libya, other countries have tried to strategically, raise up out of poverty and get out of that trap. And that's Venezuela. They realize that being an oil country, being an oil exporter and not having other industries and all that makes you very, very vulnerable. So I hope that answers your question. What else is on people's minds tonight? What else is on people's minds? What else is new? It's a great evening, isn't it? I went outside for my daily run. It was cold. It was nice, and it was springtime. But it was cold. It was freezing cold. I almost wish I'd worn sweatpants instead of my running shorts. It was very, very cold when I went out for my run today. What else is on people's minds? I can chat about anything, right? I can answer your super chats. Someone said, is full communism actually possible? Sometimes I wonder if full communism is almost like a perfect circle, right? There is no perfect circle. But you can tell, you can get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. You can have a more perfect circle and a more perfect circle and a more perfect circle and a more perfect circle, and you can get closer and closer and closer, but it's never fully a perfect circle. Maybe that's how communism is. Maybe we'll never have a world full of, just completely free of coercion. Maybe there'll always be a little tiny bit of coercion, but the amount of it will just get less and less and less and less. People talk about the communist horizon. Right, that ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world of so much abundance, But I think the basis for it is, materially, I think there's no reason to think we couldn't do there. most of human existence was communist. It was just primitive communist, right? Hunter-gatherer tribes, where there was no classes among people, and people, lived communally. Hunter-gatherer civilization was primitive communist, and I don't see a reason why we couldn't have a have a communism of vast abundance. I think it makes sense economically if you understand Marxist economics. It makes sense that eventually, thousands of years from now, we would get to a world where we live once again collectively. I think it makes sense, but maybe it is like maybe it's like the perfect circle. Maybe it is just kind of a lost horizon that we get closer and closer and closer, but we're never fully there. Maybe, I don't know. There you go. What else is on people's minds? Anything else tonight? I'm just sitting here, Corona streaming. If you haven't gotten a copy of City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, you really ought to get a copy of it. It's a great book that I wrote, and I'm very happy about it. And the new book that I'm working on is coming along. It's done. I'm rewriting it. I'm editing it now. But this book on the synthetic left that I put together, it's finished, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. Feeling very, very, very good about it. So yeah, it'll be available pretty soon. I just have to finish the editing and then send it to the proofreader, get it to the publisher, and get it all out. Yeah. What else is on people's minds? Anything else? Someone says my video on the synthetic left is fantastic. Well, you're going to like the book. The book is far more encompassing than the video. It has a lot more research, a lot more data. The bibliography is going to be so long. I have done so much research on this. That's why I had to write this, because I had just so many books I've read on this concept of how have leftist politics been distorted. And so that's why I had to write this book. And so I did. And it's going to be great. I mean, you're going to like it. You're really going to like it. I talk in City Builders and Vandals. I have a section. I talk about the synthetic left and the distortion of leftist politics. But I wrote a whole book on the subject. And it's going to be good. It's good. I've done a lot of research. I mean, just so much research on this because I'm trying to make sense. I mean, I'm somebody who's spent the last 10 years of my life and longer than that. I mean, before that I was studying, and I'm trying to build socialism and Marxism and seeing all this stuff that doesn't make sense and trying to figure out what in the world is going on. I start the book with what's wrong with American communists, because at every automation, okay, as every international gathering I ever go to, people always ask me, what is wrong with American communists? And they're right. There's something deeply wrong with American communists. Automation is the elimination of labor with technology. And that's what automation is. It's right. It's when they replace human beings with machines on the assembly line. And capitalists like to do it, right? Because they hire fewer workers, they have to pay them less. But the result is the de-skilling of jobs, so the workers they do hire are more easy to replace. And you'll see unions actively fight against automation because, they want to protect the jobs of their members. But, at the same time, technological progress under capitalism leads to greater poverty. That's the reality of automation, is the more efficient production becomes, the less people have, the less people are needed. You only have value under capitalism if you can sell your labor to a boss. And the more automation, the more technology advances, the less you're needed. So abundance and technological innovation leads to poverty. That is a big problem of capitalism. It doesn't make any sense, right? This is not rational. In a rational society, automation would be a great thing because there'd be less work for everyone to do and there'd be more stuff available, right? Under capitalism, where people's existence is as a human being, they sell their labor power, right? Dust James is talking about the old parable, the coal miner, right? The coal miner, his son says to the father, he says, I'm cold. He says, why is it so cold? And he says, because I couldn't afford to buy any coal. He says, why can't we afford to buy any coal? So I got laid off from my job at the coal mine. And he says, why did you get laid off from your job at the coal mine? He says, because there's too much coal. That's the problem of capitalism. That story comes from Poland. It was in a communist textbook, and it was from Poland, under capitalism in Poland, right? That's capitalism, right? Joe's asking me about the Nonpartisan League. I'm not sure what that is, Joe. You'll have to tell me about that. It sounds familiar. I know about there was a group that defended political prisoners, the Nonpartisan Defense League or something, but I don't know the Nonpartisan League. But yeah, automation. And the only way to obviously resolve this contradiction is to have public ownership of the means of production, to have socialism. It's the necessary solution to automation. But what else is on people's minds? How can China ensure that capitalism will not overturn the socialist system? By controlling it. Thoughts on socialism in Greece? By controlling it. I mean, they have to make sure the party stays in control. And that's why President Xi has had that big crackdown on corruption. That's why the revival of red culture. President Xi, who does not want the new capitalist class to take over. Socialism in Greece, right? What happens when no low demand? Okay, no low demand. All right, so Greece. I guess we'll talk first about Greece. Um, there was the civil war in Greece. The majority of Greece was liberated from the Nazis by the communists, um, and that they fought against the Nazis. They were communist fighting brigades, and then they formed a coalition government, and eventually there was the Greek Civil War, and the communists were defeated, and it was horrific. And the USA was backing up the Greek king and pro-fascist forces to put down the communists after they had liberated the country. It's a great example of the United States not really supporting democracy, and just I mean, the Greek Civil War was horrendous. Um, and After the Greek Civil War, in Greece, you've had the Greek Communist Party is a massive organization. And it's an anti-revisionist organization. They largely, I mean, the declarations they wrote after the fall of the Soviet Union, they didn't support Euro communism. They're a hardline communist party. They're anti-revisionist. They're widely represented in international communist organizations, the KKE or KKE or whatever. And they have whole neighborhoods they control. They're a very powerful organization, very influential in Greek society. And then you have, there were a lot of, there was a lot of big social democratic movements in Greece too. They talk about how there'd be members of parliament who'd wear Che Guevara T-shirts. There was like the Pan-Hellenic socialist movement, and there's a lot of left-wing politics in Greece. And one thing that disturbed me was during the Occupy Wall Street, you know, uh, you know, events where there was those risings going on. There was a lot of talk about Greece and the anti-austerity protests, and it seemed like every speaker, every writer, every speaker had to get up and diss the Greek Communist Party. It was like if you wanted to get your George Soros check, right? If you wanted to get funding as an academic, the first thing you had to write was F the Greek CP. It was the Greek Communist Party is no good. It was like every pamphlet, every leaflet from Occupy. People used to talk about occuporn, these like really glossy, publications that would come out brightly colored, and there was all these like pamphlets, and it was like everything you saw. It was like the Greek Communist Party is no good. They're awful. They're bad. They're aligned with Nazis. I mean, they're not. They're not aligned with Nazis. It's just. It was like it was like it was weird. So that forced me to start reading about the Greek Communist Party and to be more interested in them. Um, because I just thought that was ridiculous. The hostility displayed toward the Greek Communist Party was pretty ridiculous. And then you were supposed to be so excited about Syriza, right? This new socialist party that was formed in Greece. You got to be so excited. Syriza is this amazing new coalition. It's Trotskyist, it's Maoist, it's Hojist, it's so amazing. And everyone had to be so excited. It was like, again, to get your George Soros check, you had to be so excited about Syriza, you had to hate the Greek Communist Party. Well, Syriza got elected, and they started implementing austerity. It was a huge demoralization. And, all of that makes me have a more positive view of the Greek Communist Party. Because Syriza was a big letdown, and the Greek Communist Party was it was like the mainstream synthetic left. It was like from day one, it was like hate Syriza, hate Syriza, hate Syriza. Syriza's no good, hate Syriza. That was just constant. Or I'm sorry, it was hate the Communist Party, and then Syriza was supposed to be the good one, and it was just constant. The Greek Communist Party is no good. Every event, there was every event you ever went to, it was, you have to hate the Greek Communist Party, and it just wouldn't stop. And then Syriza was supposed to be good. They were the great one. And then they took power, and then they implemented austerity, and now we're just kind of back to square one. It was a very weird moment. So now Kinky is asking about no low demand, right? Right, when people don't have the ability to buy products, I think that's low demand, right? How do things get going? right? What do you do? I mean, the oil industry is dealing with low demand right now. There's not demand for oil, right? And so we even saw negative oil prices where oil wells were paying people to take oil out. Um, it's a big. I mean, what do you do in a situation where there's no demand? Well, the people are still hungry. There's demand in their stomachs. There's still demand. People need housing. People need, but they don't get it because of capitalism, right? There's no demand because people don't have money, right? Keynesian economics is the understanding where you solve this problem of overproduction, underconsumption. You solve it by hiring people. The government hires people, then they can spend, the government spends money to hire people, then they can, buy products, and that gets the economy going again. But more than anything, we need relief. I mean, we need to demand some relief. Absolutely. I mean, there needs to be a new working class movement. I saw the Poor People's Movement, Poor People's Campaign. That's starting to be a big thing, right? That was a kind of Bernie Sanders supporting pastors that were organizing marches against poverty. We're starting to see some of that going. There's calls for a universal basic income. That's not the solution. The solution is socialism, but people need that, and things aren't going to get better. Um, they've given relief to Wall Street, as Dust James points out. And in fact, a lot of the money that was given to small businesses didn't actually go to small businesses. It went to big businesses, and they were forced to give the money back. But it was this embarrassment that they bailed out. They bailed out. They were supposedly bailing out small businesses, and they actually bailed out huge corporations. And Amazon is making a killing right now. Walmart is making a killing right now. So it's complicated. It's very, very complicated. But I mean, there's a big divide, and that's what these protests are about. That's really what these protests are about. Is that Hobby Lobby, right? Robespierre. Okay, all right. Hobby Lobby, right? That's a craft store that supports Trump. It's owned by a Trump supporter, right? They've closed all stores until further notice, right? So they're getting killed by this economic crisis. Fracking companies are getting killed. There's a divide in the bourgeoisie. The richest of the rich are coming out of this. They've got the reserves, number one, so they're not going to get ruined by this. Number two, they've positioned themselves to be essential, so people need them. They're coming out stronger, whereas the lower levels of capital are being demolished. Amway, right? That's where Betsy DeVos's money comes from. Amway, she's getting killed. Um, yeah, it's like they've opened back up. They've opened a lot of states. A lot of states are opening up on Monday. New York City won't be opening up that soon. I hope we open up soon because it's hard. But yeah, so I'm asked about Robespierre and the French Revolution. The French Revolution is interesting, and I talk about it in the new book because there's something about the French Revolution. Robespierre, Maximilien Robespierre, was the leader of the French Revolution, a Jacobin. You had the French Revolution to overturn feudalism. And the idea was, France had been this, any advice on an up and coming communist YouTube channel. Well, Robespierre and the French Revolution, you have to remember, it's like there's actually a book that was published. It was called The Anatomy of a Revolution. And it was by an academic in the 1930s attempting to go, and how the French Revolution went through stages, right? Initially, the French Revolution started out as people begging the king for relief. Right. Perestroika versus reform and opening up. Initially, the French Revolution, they started out begging the king for relief, right? And then they ended up beheading the king, right? Storming the Bastille, freeing prisoners. Then you had the Reign of Terror and the rise of the Jacobins, and then you had what they call the Thermidor, where you had Napoleon march in, and Napoleon he kept the capitalism. It was the capitalist class taking power in France, right? They were it was a feudal country, peasants were hungry, and they overturned the king. They created a national assembly. They declared the rights of man, and they started executing aristocrats. And people talk about mob rule, and that escalated. And then you had Napoleon march in and solidify things, and he brought back the church, and he created a meritocracy. He called it, and it was kind of rule of the military, but he maintained the economic advances, capitalism and such. So that was the cycle of the French Revolution, and the society that came into existence. Napoleon was a synthesis, right? Napoleon, he kept capitalist relations, he promoted meritocracy, but he brought back the church. The Catholic Church, but once again had power in France. He got rid of the radical atheism of the French Revolution. The French Revolution, you have to remember, was atheist. It was an atheist revolution. They converted all the churches into temples of reason and science. They executed priests in big numbers because the priests were considered to be promoting the feudal aristocracy, and the Catholic Church had promoted feudalism. Um, and Napoleon came in, and Napoleon, he was a synthesis, right? He brought the Catholic Church back. He put the military in charge. He ruled as the emperor, so it was kind of a monarchy again. But he kept the capitalist property relations, right? He kept the business owners. He didn't restore feudalism. He kept the new system, but he made a compromise to keep it in power. And that's what happens, right? And then in a lot of ways, the Soviet Union, the way it ultimately became was, it was what they could do. It was an advance with some compromises. And that was the French Revolution. And yeah, I mean, there's an individual who probably played a very big role in the French Revolution that kind of people ignore it, but Marquis de Sade was the pornographic French writer. The word sadism is derived from his name. He was a very key figure in the French Revolution. He was actually in the Bastille. He was one of the prisoners in the Bastille when they stormed. There's this July 14th, Bastille Day, when this crowd of people freed this prison. There were very few people. This prison that was a symbol of the king's authority, the Bastille. It was this prison that was considered to be, a symbol. It was the place where people got tortured and all that. It was a symbol of the king's tyranny. It was the Bastille. Well, there was barely anybody in it, except one of the people in it was the Marquis de Sade, this guy, this French aristocrat who wrote pornographic novels about women being raped and tortured. He was there, and he was an atheist. And a lot of the French Revolution was about unleashing people's sexual passions and unleashing people's, violent impulses, right? And that sex and violence kind of walk hand in hand, right? And that aggression, it was about libido, right? You read, Sigmund Freud, he talks about libido, how, aggressive impulses, sexual impulses are tied together, right? These primitive drives for sex, these primitive drives for violence, they're closely tied. And the French Revolution was very, very violent, but it was also very, very sexual. And that, this pornographic writer, Marquis de Sade, he was a pivotal figure in the French Revolution. You couldn't have had him. John Paul Marat was the agitator, right? The journalist who was kind of the agitator of the French Revolution, right? I mean, it was the French Revolution's worth studying. It was the revolution that really, more than any other revolution, impacted the revolutionary intelligentsia. I mean, Karl Marx they were living in the aftermath of the French Revolution. They studied the French Revolution, right? The French Revolution was like the biggest thing that had ever happened. I mean, Malthusianism was the British capitalists trying to figure out the French Revolution. It was this huge social explosion. A society, France had been the most feudal, most traditional society, and it was ripped to shreds. Thomas Sankara. It was ripped to shreds, and socialism emerged out of it. And it was an unleashing of people's passions. And a lot of what we associate with leftism and the revolutionary intelligentsia comes out of that. And I talk about this in the new book a lot because the French Revolution kind of laid the basis for what leftism really is, and that needs to be reconsidered. There's a lot of destructive things about the revolutionary intelligentsia and about the left as we've come to understand it, but that's because the left itself, the concept of the left, was the French Revolution. So the question is, what advice would I have for somebody who is looking to open a new YouTube channel? Well, the main advice I would give you is to try and connect with other people who have leftist YouTube channels. Try to have good guests on there. Would you be willing to do an interview with ideologues? Maybe. I mean, I don't really like the format where it's like I just reply to your emails and then you read it all out loud or something. I mean, if you want to have me on, just have me on, right? Let's just have a chat. But yeah, I mean, I suppose I'll talk to anybody. I mean, I'm not, I looked at the channel, this ideologues. I didn't quite get it, but, I mean, if you want to interview me sometime on Skype or something, sure. But yeah, my advice would be to have other people on, and don't come down too hard, be open to debate, have people on that you don't agree with, have your channel be a place that not everyone doesn't have to 100% agree with you in order to enjoy the content. Make it a hub. Make it a place where different ideas, different people that are interested in these ideas can come and hear things, and have basic information. There's not a lot of basic information out there. There's a lot of polemics. There's a lot of people debating other people, and there's a lot of people putting each other down. There's not a lot of basic information. I think people need basic Marxist information. What is this? What is that? What is socialism? What is a proletarian? What happened in the French Revolution? So I think that's what people need. How was perestroika different than the reform and opening up? Well, the reform and opening up, you have to remember the reform and opening up in China was like certain cities, they opened market zones, they built model cities with foreign investment. But the Chinese Communist Party maintained absolute control. The Chinese Communist Party was thoroughly, ideological, and whereas with perestroika, you had glasnost, where they're letting anti-communists into the government. On top of that, the Communist Party itself, a big chunk of them are not really believing in Marxism anymore and are feeling like, well, Marxism's out of date and we just kind of want universal human values. So you have like this kind of ideological surrender going on in the Soviet Communist Party in the 80s. You didn't have that in the Deng Xiaoping era. You had an understanding that the Gang of Four were wrong and that poverty is not socialism, but there was a strong belief in communism, strong belief in Marxism. Right? The population was still thoroughly behind the party. In fact, they were more behind it when they saw the fruits of the reform and opening up. And there wasn't an assault on Marxism coming from the top in the name of, and that was, the reform and opening up. The reform and opening up was done in the name of communism, and it was done by a country that still had faith in the Communist Party, whereas perestroika and glasnost were conducted. They were conducted by a leadership that was weary. It was in a generational crisis. You have to remember that the Gorbachev era, you started having leaders who were not alive at the time of the Russian Revolution, who were born afterwards, and you started to have, it was kind of the results of depoliticization. During the Cultural Revolution in China, as bad as it was, average people were politicized. Average people had to know communism, and there was a huge push for people to understand Marxism and communism. In the Soviet Union, they talk about, there was a depoliticization. There was just this emphasis on technical achievements. And especially in the 70s and 80s, there was this really kind of depoliticization. I think that's the difference. But it's an important question. Tomas Sankara, revolutionary leader in Burkina Faso, right? Did great things, anti-imperialist. His writings are very widely available, where he talks about imperialism and how the African people were treated, the way he was gone after. I have a positive view of Tomas Sankara, very positive view of him. Anything else on people's minds? Anything else? Anything else? Because it's getting late. I'm going to take another sip of this. If anyone has anything else, now is the time to tell me. Talk about anti-communist censorship on Facebook. Yeah, that's very important. I didn't know this, but people have been coming to me and telling me that Victory Day posts have been censored. I don't know if people have seen this, but, like posts, if you post the red flag held over Stalingrad, they'll censor it on Facebook. Unbelievable, right? You can't celebrate the defeat of Nazis in World War II on Facebook. What in the world's going on here? I mean, why not? But there's this, like, censorship, right? If you post, it's unbelievable. I posted on May 4th the image of the Kent State Massacre, and they buzzed it out. They said, it's an image of violence or whatever. It has a dead body in it. But yeah, somebody else, they got banned from Facebook because they got a 24-hour suspension because they put up a picture of the liberation of Germany, of Berlin, of the Soviet flag in Berlin. I mean, this is unbelievable. The anti-Victory Day, anti-Russia sentiment is just massive. And they're censoring posts. People have gotten their posts flagged for celebrating the defeat of the Nazis. And again, but this fits just like all across Eastern Europe. The U.S.-aligned regimes are tearing down World War II memorials. This fits with what's been going on, right? The Soviets are the main enemy. Hitler wasn't so bad. At least he killed communists. That narrative is very popular. That's the mainstream narrative. That's the NATO narrative. It's absolutely the NATO narrative. The way, it's Timothy Snyder of Yale. It's, that's the narrative that's out there. So it doesn't surprise me that they're doing this. And this is why we need to oppose tech censorship. When communists were cheering for what happened to Alex Jones, that wasn't right. I don't like Alex Jones. I don't agree with him, but I don't think he should be censored. I don't think he should be banned. So there you go. Scary times we live in. idea and state of socialism in current day Iran. Well, Iran does not call their system socialist. They call their system not capitalism but Islam. But the major industries are run by the state. They have these things called the Basij, which are like revolutionary committees. And there are leftists in Iran. I mean, there's a lot of people who believe in Marxism. There's people on television like commentators that have kind of a Marxist analysis of U.S. imperialism that are there. But Iran is not a Marxist country. They are Muslims. They're very clear about that. And that but their economy is also not capitalist, and they make that very clear. They call their system not capitalism but Islam. And the state controls the economy. The biggest entity in Iran economically is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which Trump declared to be terrorists, which is ridiculous, right? But the IRGC in Iran is actually the biggest economic entity in the country, and a lot of the industries are run by them. And it's kind of like China, where it's like there's private companies that aren't really private. They're government run, but just kind of it's like they're technically private, but they depend on a government subsidy and they don't function according to market laws. And a lot of Iran's like that. The reason that Iran has been so heavily industrialized, and that's the truth. I mean, the economic development compared to other countries throughout that region, Iran has been. I mean, the highways they've built, the power plants they've built, the electricity, the running. I mean, they have built a modern country, right? And they did that by centrally planning. They had, during the 80s, they had this thing called the construction jihad, where they were mobilizing construction of the country. They were following similar to those 5-year plans of Stalin. It's complicated. Russia gives money to people when they have kids. What are your personal thoughts on this? Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that about Russia. I know that there are different countries that have done that. It's kind of a stimulus checks to parents. I know Libya did that under Gaddafi. It's a good thing to do, right? Family starting benefit. I think that's a good thing to do for the government to kind of say, and people will do that, right? In families, the parents, if their kid gets married and has a kid, they'll actually give them like a benefit. They do it in terms of taxes. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to subsidize people when they have a family. I think it's a good thing, right? And this idea that there's overpopulation, we should discourage people, antinatalism, I don't buy into that. Don't buy into that at all. I think it's a good thing. I'm glad. I didn't know that they did that in Russia. It doesn't surprise me. It sounds like a good thing. Do you like Denmark's system of government? And and could some form of it work in the USA? Well, I like having benefits for people. I like health care and education being provided to people. Denmark's still a capitalist country, right? But it has a very big welfare state. That's a good thing. I think that's a good thing to have a welfare state where people are cared for, they have what they need. But Denmark, it's a capitalist welfare state. I mean, that's the Scandinavian countries. They have not changed capitalist property relations. They don't have centrally planned economies. They have big welfare states. I'm in favor of big welfare states. But that's not ultimately the answer. I'm in favor of socialism, but I'm not opposed to welfare states. It's better than not having that. It's better than free market problems. But yeah, so there you go. I mean, there are things we can learn about it. Do you think the U.S. government was behind the botched invasion of Venezuela? Did you hear Mike Pompeo's response? Mike Pompeo said, we were not directly involved. Now, that was Mike Pompeo's response. He said, well, we were not directly involved. Oh, okay. We didn't do it ourselves. See, we called somebody who called somebody and they did it. But yeah, it's pretty obvious. Yeah, I think this came from the top, but not directly, right? It was a private company, right? The U.S. military didn't invade, remember? It was Silver Corp. Private company invaded. Oh, so the fact that, so these people, these two guys, they went to Venezuela with the intent of violently overthrowing the government. They've now been arrested for it. And Mike Pompeo wants them back. Oh, they can't hold these people. Well, I must say, folks, I'm sorry, but if two Venezuelans came to the United States, tried to violently overthrow the government, had a plan to do so, do you think the U.S. officials would not arrest them? And do you think they would just then give them back? Oh, Venezuela, your guys came here, they were trying to violently overthrow the government, engage in terrorist attacks. Yeah, here you go. And that's what these guys were doing. I mean, they're calling them terrorists, and that's what they were trying to engage in terrorism. The Venezuelan opposition are terrorists, folks. There's no way around it. The Venezuelan opposition burns food warehouses in the hopes of creating food scarcity they can blame on socialism. The Venezuelan opposition has strung wires across intersections to behead cops on motorcycles. The Venezuelan opposition has bombed buses. They bombed hospitals. They are terrorists. They are Al-Qaeda. They are ISIS. They are murderers, okay? No one ever wants to talk about this. Oh, they're just people who want human rights. They're just, oh, they don't like the dictator Maduro. Bullshit. They are terrorists. These people are terrorists. And they have far more responsibility for the situation in the country than Maduro does, right? I mean, do you think Maduro wants people to not have food? No, but they do. They want people to not have food, right? Because that will hurt Maduro, right? I mean, they've tried many coup attempts. I mean, unbelievable, right? And people just say, "Oh, Maduro's a dictator." Well, Maduro has brought the hammer down to try and deal with terrorists, foreign-backed terrorists who have tried to attack him with drones, have done all kinds of. I mean, it's the Venezuelan opposition has worked really, really hard to try and foment a crisis in the country, try and make things in the country break down, try and tear the country apart, right? And I must say, Venezuelan Americans are the most self-hating people. I mean, they want their own people to starve. They want their own people to die because they hate socialism. That's disgusting to me. Absolutely disgusting to me. What else is on people's minds? What else is new? The idea logs, people, you need to send me an email with a proposal and we'll move ahead. Idea behind China's investments into Africa. I think that China, they're trying to make money, raise themselves out of poverty, expand their business interests. I think they think having more prosperity in Africa will make more people for them to trade with, and that's the Belt and Road, right? China wants to make money. They want to have a bigger economy in Africa to make money. China's really good at making trains. China's really good at computer technology, and Africa is where you have a lot of the minerals involved in computer technology, right? I mean, Huawei Technologies is the biggest cell phone manufacturer in the world, biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. Well, in Africa, you have a lot of the minerals that are necessary to make computers and cell phones. So China wants to have a relationship there, and it wants the countries where those minerals come from to be more stable, more prosperous, so that their access can be there. Yeah, I mean, China is acting in its self-interest. There's no reason. This isn't like China isn't just going out of the goodness of its heart and just doing kind things. China has its own self-interest. It wants to trade. It wants to do business, but it has an economic model that is not imperialist. China trades. Now, some thoughts on the maximum wage. Well, I mean, it's kind of like abolish billionaires. I don't like these phrases that hint that there can be too much wealth or that hint that we should want people to be less prosperous. I don't like that, right? I mean, I feel like the goal of socialism and Marxism is to vastly expand living conditions for all people. So if we go around saying abolish billionaires, we sound like we want people to be poor. The reality is we want everyone to live far wealthier than a billionaire currently does. Um, if we go around saying we want a maximum wage, we go around saying, oh, we don't want people to make too much money. I don't like that. I know they had a party maximum in the Soviet Union when they were building socialism. The idea was communists, should have a less amount or something. But I really think we should stay away from indicating that we're opposed to people living prosperously. My feeling is we want everyone to live as prosperous as possible. And that socialism will enable us to do that. Thank you, Herb Bryant, for the super chat. I do appreciate it. But socialism will enable us to build a society where people can live more prosperously, when people can have what they need. I think we need to stay away from phrasing that would lead people to the wrong conclusion. Watch any good movies or TV shows, asked Tim Stacy. Well, interesting. Wow, what have I watched? I mean, my wife, likes to watch TV. I am a go kind of guy. I get antsy if I'm sitting in that TV chair too much. I get bored. I would just want to go do something. That's why when I like to go to the movies. I can't do that now because of the pandemic. I like to go to the movies because I sit there, right? And it's like it's dark and it like holds my attention. My mind isn't on other things. But my wife and I will watch different things. We watched, it was a series on Amazon Prime or something, or Hulu. It was called Mrs. Maisel. It was about this woman becoming a comedian. That was kind of entertaining. What else? We watched this program, this series that's been on Hulu or one of the things about Phyllis Schlafly and feminism in the 70s and Gloria Steinem that's been amusing. Totally leaves out, Gloria Steinem's ties to the CIA. Gloria Steinem, feminist, founder of Democratic Socialism America, but was also a CIA agent. It leaves all of that out. It doesn't talk about her ties to the CIA, but we watched some of that. Big Bang Theory is a show that I watch with my wife. We like that a lot. Modern Family. My wife and I really like Modern Family. It ran out though. It's over, right? They had the last episode, but we enjoyed it. We really liked Modern Family, and we'll watch a rerun of Modern Family. That's good stuff. Yeah. Um, and sometimes I'll watch stuff that I'm interested in on my computer. I'll watch like old movies and stuff like that. You know, and I'll watch things from the '80s and the '70s. And I'll watch different things. I mean, I watch to be entertained. I'll watch things like, but it's getting harder. It's really getting harder. I mean, I was watching. Sometimes I'll turn on Bill Maher, but I find him to be such a snob and such a liberal. And like the Tara Reid video he made was unbelievable. I just couldn't believe, I mean, how despicable he was around Tara Reid. And just like the week before, his video, I'm going to blame China. It's edgy, but I'm going to blame China. Despicable. Bill Maher can just be despicable. And Colbert can be the same way. It's like, you want to be entertained. You want to turn on John Oliver or Colbert or Bill Maher and just kind of be entertained, have a few chuckles. But there's so much smug, liberal bullshit. I'm sorry to swear, but it's just, it's getting harder to just be entertained, to just kind of sit back and watch something that's fun to watch. It's getting harder. It's getting harder, folks. I'm struggling. I just want to be entertained. So, you know, um, yeah. We all love Lee Camp. I mean, he does great comedy work. He's great. There's a lot of, RT is great. I mean, RT, thank goodness. RT is amazing. Um, so many, it's like the only place you can find real news that's not, pushing U.S. imperialism. I mean, it's so scary. But yeah, I just, I'm not one of those people who can just sit and watch Netflix for hours. Okay, what was that super chat that went by about World War II or something like that? What was it? Went by. Someone asked me a super chat about World War II. I want to give them an answer. Now I'm switching to water. I'm out of orange juice. So, will World War III happen in my lifetime? I really hope not. I mean, I really hope not. I really, really hope not. I hope that we have the common sense to avoid it. Um, I feel like it would be suicide. Would World War III be, Russia and China fighting, the United States, and that would be an epic disaster. I hope everyone would do everything they could to stop World War III, because World War III is something we don't want to see, and it would be a nightmare. My thoughts on Modi. Well, Modi, he's a conservative in India, and he's kind of like Erdogan. He's kind of like Duterte. He's not a he's not a socialist. He's right wing. He's not, but he's more of a nationalist. He's a little more independent. And that's the thing. He'll be friendly to Russia and China when they make him a deal. He'll be friendly to the United States when they make him a deal, right? He's tied to repression of Muslims and all that, but he'll be friendly to whoever makes him a deal. He's a bourgeois nationalist. And he's more independent. And you'll see that. There's big articles denouncing him every so often over his banking regulations. The Wall Street doesn't like his banking regulations. Obama kind of went out of his way to diss him as a favor to the Muslim Brotherhood. The guy's got a record as an anti-Islamic, tied to massacres and all kinds of things. I don't have a very positive view of Modi, but at the same time, I recognize the USA would rather have a puppet, right? That he's like Erdogan, he's like Duterte. He's not a socialist, definitely not a socialist, not left wing, but he's a figure who plays ball his own way. And the rise of Russia and China has enabled figures like that, people to rise up around the world, who are a little more independent. Modi represents the capitalists of India, right? Not the workers of India, definitely not the workers of India, but not the capitalists of the United States. And sometimes the capitalists of India can make a better deal with Russia and China. Sometimes the capitalists of India can make a better deal with the capitalists of the United States. He works for them. Duterte is like that. Duterte, sometimes he makes a better deal with China. Sometimes he makes a better deal. Sometimes he makes a better deal with the United States, right? Erdogan was like that. He was with the USA in Syria and the coup and all that. And they go back and forth. These are nationalist figures, bourgeois nationalists. And it's because of the rise of Russia and China that figures like this can come into existence, because they have more economic freedom. There's more people to do business with them. Now, Madison is asking about in India. Yes, there is Kerala. There's a big communist presence in India. There's a region that's controlled by communists like Kerala. But Modi is hostile to that. He's a Hindu nationalist, right? He's a conservative, BJP. But he's more independent, right? The Congress Party, which is like the mainstream party of India, right? That's a party that's just straight up in line with the United States. Modi is more of a Hindu nationalist, and he does stuff that bothers the U.S. imperialists every so often. It's complicated, but he's not for the working class. He's not progressive, but the reason he's able to exist is because of Russia and China, because there's more freedom, right? And that's the kind of thing when countries are able to, when the socialist bloc exists, when there's an alternative to Western capitalism, that lays the basis for nationalists. Have you heard of the $1 billion party of the Shah of Iran through? No, but it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all. The Shah of Iran, he was, looting the country, working with Rockefeller and all of that. And then, and that's the crazy thing is Trump really loves to pander to the Shah people of Southern California, right? Los Angeles, there's a whole lot of, people from the Shah's ruling inner circle. And, Trump panders to them like crazy. He just, he's desperate to get their approval. And he says, like, the Shah, he called his people Aryans. He said that they were not, they were white people. They were Aryans. They were not like, Arabs and other races. There was big repression. There's a lot of, Turkmen in Iran. There's a lot of Arabs. There's a lot of Kurds. But, the Shah was for the Persian supremacism, and, the Shah admired Hitler and such. And so there's a huge effort. If you look at Trump's anti-Iran rants, there's a huge effort to try and appeal to the Pahlavi. That's the dynasty, right? The Shah's, that's the Pahlavi dynasty. Huge effort to try and appeal to them. Do you like Trevor Noah or Conan O'Brien? I listen to Trevor Noah every so often. I really liked Jon Stewart, even though I didn't agree with a lot of what he said, but I liked Jon Stewart. And when Trevor Noah took over The Daily Show, I just couldn't get into him, and I just couldn't get into him. Conan O'Brien, I've never really cared for. But lately, though, people have sent me Trevor Noah stuff, and it's actually, I'm seeing more Trevor Noah stuff I can appreciate nowadays. Shah of Iran died in the 80s. Of course he did. But I'm sorry, Southern California is full of those folks. It's full of, Shah supporters. They even had a reality television program at one point just about them, the Shahs of Sunset. And there's a milieu of the people that were in the Shah's inner circle. And actually, there's a guy who's like a religion expert that they have on CNN a lot, Reza Aslan. And he's Persian, and he is, from what I understand, his family must be like tied to the Shah, because they fled after the revolution, and and he's right wing, and he was grew up in a kind of a secular household, converted to evangelical Christianity, then became a Muslim, and he's written books about Islam and Christianity and stuff that are popular. But he's one of those people. He's Southern California. That's where a lot of them live. In New York City, there's Iranians that are exiled, but they tend to be Mujahideen Khalq. It tends to be MEK kind of people. And I know there's Iranians in Texas. I believe there's some Iranians who live in Texas, if I'm not mistaken. But I don't really know. The anti-Iran folks, the folks that are the Iranian exiles, hate the Iranian government. I want to stay the hell away from them, because I've spent a lot of time in Iran, and was on Press TV a lot, and I don't want to have a problem with those folks. But there you go. Did you hear about Ilhan Omar pandering to AIPAC? Yeah, and that's unfortunate. The thing is, Ilhan Omar, she the Muslim community, as I've talked about, right? You have the Shia Muslim community, right? They're the minority. And then you have the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood, that's like Qatar and Turkey. And then you have Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabis. And it seems that Ilhan Omar is in with that Muslim Brotherhood current, right? It's that current that's tied to Turkey and Qatar. They're critical of Saudi Arabia, right? And they want to negotiate with Iran, but they're still anti-Iran, and they want to overthrow Assad. They're all about, and that's, if you listen to Ilhan Omar, the statements she makes, it's allowed. If you watch Al Jazeera or look at AJ Plus, that's the line, right? That's the party line, and that's what Ilhan Omar puts out, And so of course she's going to be anti-Iran, but she wants to negotiate. She's going to be critical of Saudi Arabia. She's going to want to violently overthrow the Syrian government. She's said awful things about Syria. And she's tied to that current, and that current seems to be making a strategic, that current. I get the impression, if you look at like Linda Sarsour and forces like that current of the Islamic community it's got the kind of the Al Jazeera, Turkey, Qatar foreign policy perspective. That current is starting to make inroads in with the like AOC, Bernie Sanders crowd, right? Because on the right, anti-Islamic bigotry is so big, right? It's so prevalent. The Islamic community, out of necessity, of like self-defense, is becoming more political and getting more involved. But that current, right? So it seems like the Bernie Sanders milieu, you're starting to see more voices that are Muslim, but they're Muslim, but they're that current, right? Whereas I feel like, Wahhabi kind of forces might be friendlier to Trump or might be, more mainstream Democrats. But, that kind of forces. AJ Plus, you look at Al Jazeera, it's weird because Al Jazeera, they talk about Syria, they're putting State Department propaganda. I mean, they talk about foreign policy stuff. They almost seem to line up with the United States, but some of their like material is very radical. I mean, they talk about the Black Panthers and racism and capitalism, and some of their stuff on U.S. politics is very, very left wing. So it's interesting to look at, but it represents that current, right? And that we know that the CIA had the task of training and aligning with the Muslim Brotherhood, whereas the Pentagon makes a lot of money. The Pentagon makes a lot of money from selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. And that divide within the pro-U.S. camp in the Middle East, thank you, David, for the super chat, that divide seems to define what's going on. The Obama crowd was friendlier to the Muslim Brotherhood. The Trump crowd is friendlier to the Wahhabis. That's the divide. The military is friendlier to the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia. The CIA is friendlier to the Muslim Brotherhood. That's the divide. That's really the divide, right? The Muslim Brotherhood versus the Saudis. It is illegal to be a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in Saudi Arabia. They will kill you. They will execute you for that. It's a terrorist group, And it seems like that is the division among. They all want to overthrow Assad. They all don't like Iran, but the Brotherhood is for negotiating with Iran. The Saudis are for an arms race with Iran, right? They all want to overthrow Assad. The Saudis want to have death squads that do it. What do you think about Chomsky rationalizing occupation of Syria to protect the Kurds? My family suffered at the hands of the Kurds. What do you think about those who support the Kurds and not the Syrian government? Well, here's the thing. The Kurdish people, I'm not going to say they don't have the right to a national territory. I'm not going to say that the Kurds, that have suffered oppression, and I'm not going to denounce them. I'm not going to. No, but at the same time, I get really frustrated. It irks me that there's a current of people. The USA is going to invade Venezuela, or the USA is putting sanctions. Well, Maduro's a dictator. I don't like Maduro. Maduro, he violates. Oh, I don't like Maduro, right? The USA is going to overthrow the Syrian government. I don't like this Assad. He's a Baathist. Oh, he's killing his own people, blah, blah, blah. The USA is attacking Iran. Oh, I don't like Iran. The USA is attacking China. Well, China, oh, they're not. But the USA is giving guns and weapons and arming the Kurds. Oh, Hoffa. Do these people not realize that they're shills? I'm not going to full on denounce the Kurds, okay? The Kurdish people they've suffered horrendously. They have the right to their national territory. I don't agree with how they were, working with the United States and fighting against the Syrian government. But regardless, right? If the only force in the world that you're willing to support is the force the U.S. government is giving weapons to, how in the world can you call yourself an anti-imperialist? I'm sorry. How in the world can you call yourself an anti-imperialist if the only group you can support is one being armed by the U.S. State Department? Do these people not have a double take? Do they look themselves, I'm such a revolutionary, right? The U.S. government's giving them guns and I'm supporting them. Wow, good for you. Good for you. Are you proud of yourself? It annoys me. Okay, and I urge people to be cautious. I see people shit posting the Kurds a lot, right? Oh, the Kurds are a bunch of. Slow down on that, right? I know right now it's complicated, right? And you never want to diss a nationality and all of that. I don't feel like the Kurds were not playing a very good role in the Syrian civil war. But regardless, the point is, if the only anti-imperialist country you have the guts to support is one that's not really anti-imperialist and being supported by the U.S. government, how in the world can you call yourself a revolutionary, right? And the other thing I'll say is this, okay? I'm just going to say this. The Kurds call themselves anarchists. They supposedly follow the teachings of Murray Bookchin. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Well, okay. Let's remember, first the Kurds were Soviet communists. Then they were, because they thought the Soviet communists would support them. Then, that became not clear. Then they were Maoists. They thought China would support them. Then they were, what were they next? They were Hojists, followers of Enver Hoxha. How do you know? Billionaires, Jimmy Dore. Okay. The Kurds, they were Hojists, followers of Enver Hoxha in Albania. Now they're anarchists. I have a feeling they're Kurdish nationalists. They're fighting for the Kurdish people, and they have socialist economic views. But their views change based on who they are pandering to. That when the Soviet communists were the people that were going to support them, they were Soviet communists. When the Mao and China looked like it might support them, they were that. When Albania might support them, they were that. And now they're courting a bunch of hipster middle class intellectuals in Europe and the United States. Now they're that. I have a feeling they're Kurdish nationalists, right? They're fighting for the liberation of the Kurdish people, and they believe in socialism, as most people around the world who are fighting for national liberation do, right? If you want to raise your country out of poverty, you need a planned economy. But I don't buy the idea that they're, oh yes, they're just like, anarchist hipsters in Brooklyn. No, come on now. No, I think that they are Kurdish nationalists, right? And they see an opportunity to collaborate with the imperialists, and they've taken it. But then the imperialists seem to have stabbed them in the back, so they're confused. But no, I don't buy the idea that they're ideological anarchists. I think that that's a way to market themselves to hipsters, right? I think that's what that's about. It's a lot of, and I've heard of groups in Latin America that do a similar thing, right? That they know how to fly in the college professors and put on a show for them and show them the factory where every worker gets a vote and isn't this pure anarchism and give us money. And I think that courting intellectuals and courting Western intellectuals has a lot to do with what this is about, right? There's not socialist countries going to give them any armed support at this point. So, they're not going to get any support from any socialist country because, socialist countries want to do business with Turkey and such. And so they're not going to get socialist countries to give them weapons or support. So they got to get weapons and support from somebody. So they need to, come up with an image that'll be appealing to Western hipsters. And again, you could say the same thing about Mao. You can say the same thing about, forces in Latin America, that at the end of the day, people in developing countries want their country to be free. And they tend to see socialism, some form of socialism, as the way to do it. Right? Kiki says thank you. Right? At the end of the day, that's really what it's about. And they might talk like Maoists sometimes. They might talk like Stalinists sometimes. They might talk like Albania. But at the end of the day, socialism is the road to freedom and the liberation of oppressed nations. And so I think the Kurds are fighting. They're Kurdish nationalists. They want to free the Kurdish people. And they want to free the Kurdish people. And they believe in some level of socialist economics. But I don't think that they're ideological anarchists. I think that they're marketing themselves. And that's who they want to give them money. That's who they want to support them. So I don't know what, I haven't seen this Jimmy Dore video about billionaires and Bernie Sanders. I'll have to check it out. I haven't seen it. I like to follow Jimmy Dore's work. I just haven't had a chance to see it. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of my opinion there. And, I'm not going to denounce the Kurds. Let me emphasize this. I'm not going to denounce them. I think the Kurdish people, just like any other people, have the right to their territory, their nationhood. And I urge people not to shitpost them too much, but I mean, the people who idealize them, yeah, I'm sorry, like, that's pathetic. Uh, but yeah, I'll have to check out this Jimmy Dore video. Someone just super chatted me, and thank you, Kinky, for this super chat. I do appreciate it. I guess I must have been making a point that you agreed with, or something. But thank you. I do appreciate it. You know, I'm just trying to do the best we can here. Yeah. So, um, you haven't seriously tried to explore anarchist literature if you think that. Well, actually, I have. I mean, I've read Bakunin, I've read Kropotkin. I know a lot about anarchism. So, Kinky just agrees with my existence. Well, thank you, Kinky. I do too. I agree with your existence as well. But yeah, I mean, I've studied anarchism, and I mean, what's weird is and I've talked about this before, is that anarchism in a lot of cases, the anarchists were for the peasantry, the communists were for the factory workers. There's differences here. I mean, you talk about Proudhon, right? And yeah, I've studied anarchism. It's an important. You can't really understand Marxism without studying anarchism, right? And the History of the Three Internationals, the book that I recommend by William Z. Foster, there's a lot about anarchism in there, right? William Z. Foster was an anarchist. I bet you didn't know that. He was a anarcho-syndicalist. He was an IWW member. He led a split from the IWW called the Syndicalist League of North America. In fact, most of the great communists in the USA started out as anarchists because the IWW, the big anarchist union of the 19 teens, that organization, the Wobblies, that was the most radical group prior to the formation of the Communist Party. I mean, Mao was an anarchist. He was a follower of Peter Kropotkin, right? He was a Kropotkinist anarchist. He had the New People's Study Group, as Dust James points out. That doesn't get talked about a lot, too, but if you read the biography of Mao by Han Suyin, The Morning Deluge, if you read, The Rise of Mao and Chinese Communism, I mean, they talk about, there's a deep, deep anarchist influence on Maoism, and that can't be forgotten. So anarchism, you have to understand anarchism if you're going to understand Marxist theory. You need to understand anarchism. And that, I mean, when I was in the park at Occupy Wall Street, I would meet people who'd be like anarchists. They'd be like, I'm an anarchist. And I was like, oh, you like Proudhon? You like Kropotkin? I don't like anybody. I have my own ideas, man. Freedom. I'm an anarchist. I'd just be like, oh, God. And I mean, I met a lot of people, why are you an anarchist? My favorite punk band's an anarchist, dude. Yeah. A lot of people who call themselves anarchists are not really ideological. The ideological current of anarchism is kind of separate. You talk about anarcho-communists, anarcho-syndicalists. There is an ideological current. But for a lot of people, anarchism is just a scene. It's just kind of, they wear punk rock T-shirts. They go to concerts. They might know about issues. They might, their favorite band did a song on oil drilling in Alaska being bad or something, but they don't really understand it with much depth. Ideological anarchists are kind of a different current. Um, you know, but yeah, I mean, it's worth looking into. And you have to understand it. I mean, anarchism is the left deviation. Anarchism is the attempt to create socialism without state coercion. Right? It's the idea we're just going to build our little communes. We're going to build our cooperatives. And the capitalism, we're not going to run for office. We're not going to engage in political action. We're not going to try and take over the state. We're going to try and build communities on our own. We're going to just we're going to try to build cooperatives. We're going to engage in ultra-left adventurism in some cases, but we're not trying to seize control of the state. That's the main thing. They don't want state power. And it's an ultra-left deviation. It's a middle-class deviation in my view. I think that state power in our time is essential. Now, eventually it won't be. My hope is, with the rise, we get, through socialism and eventually communism, the need for the state, as people become more abundant, the coercion will fade. But until then, the role of the government is pretty essential, right? I mean, right now in this pandemic, right? I mean, everyone's wondering who's the government going to help, who's it not going to help. I mean, the government is pretty essential. So struggling for control of the government, for working class people to have control and influence over the government is essential. I think political action, as they call it, is essential. There should be a struggle to influence, workers should struggle to be represented in the government. And you can't just pretend the government doesn't exist and build your cooperative, your mutual aid. I'm all for mutual aid, but the government is a big institution in society right now, and struggle for state action is necessary. But it's late, folks. It's late. So I'm going to take a drink of water, and I'm just going to conclude this chat. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. I can't tell you how much I value each and every one of you. I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation. Remember to keep your eye on the horizon, right? It's the only way we can keep from getting dizzy and seasick in this crazy, crazy world. Keep your eye on the horizon like a good sailor. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. And on that note, I'm out.